Chapter 800. The divine power of all Buddhas was like a mountain that could suppress the universe. Although the palm looked peaceful and heavy, it was filled with a supreme power that could suppress heaven and earth. How dare you? Dipankara's expression changed greatly. He had never thought that Yi Xian would attack him. He had no time to think about it, so he raised his palms to meet the attack. Bang! There was a loud explosion, and the void was destroyed. The huge palm of Buddha's light that filled the sky slapped Dipankara to the ground and shattered half of his body. Golden blood, could also become Buddha's blood. Golden Buddha's blood spilled all over the ground. Dipankara's shattered body kept twitching on the ground, and he fell into a daze. One strike, just one strike. Yi Xian's strike made Dipankara suffer an unimaginable calamity. This made all the bodhisattvas and Buddhas in the Great Lane Temple silent. Silence, extreme silence. However, an atmosphere of panic spread throughout the Great Lane Temple. Duo Bao Rilai's complexion, which was originally rosy and peaceful, had turned deathly pale. Terrifying, too terrifying. He didn't even see how the ancient Buddha Dipankara was defeated. He only saw Yi Xian slap out a palm that covered the sky. As a quasi-sage, the ancient Buddha Dipankara actually fell into such a state. Sage-to-be. Dipankara was a real sage-to-be. Although he had just become a sage-to-be, he had surpassed the category of immortals. How could he be defeated so miserably? Bodhisattvas and Buddhas in all directions, and even Duo Bao Rilai knew that Yi Xian was very strong. Otherwise, the two sages of the West would not let him guard the Great Lane Temple of Spirited Mountain. However, Duo Bao Rilai and the others did not expect Yi Xian to be so strong, so terrifyingly strong. He could suppress a sage-to-be without any power to fight back. Who in the Western sect could have such a cultivation? If Yi Xian had not shown the aura of a sage, Duo Bao Rilai and the others would have thought that Yi Xian was a sage. Otherwise, how could his cultivation be so terrifying? Evil creature, your demonic roots are deep, and you don't have Buddha in your heart. You should enter Juyo Tower and repent for 100,000 years. Only then can the demonic nature in your heart be removed. Yi Xian leaped into the air on the Buddha's golden lotus until he stood in front of Dipankara, who was still twitching on the ground like a maggot. Apparently, he had not recovered from the blow he received from Yi Xian. Who was Yi Xian? Yi Xian was a terrifying figure who had passed the first tribulation of the heavenly law. A wisp of saint power was already growing in his body. No one in the realm of sage-to-be could be his opponent. Suppressing Dipankara Buddha, who had just become a sage-to-be, was a piece of cake for Yi Xian. Qing Ming. Buddha. Randing knows his mistake. Don't lock him in Juyo Tower. Half of Dipankara Buddha's body had exploded, and he was now seriously injured and on the verge of death. He did not dare to show the slightest arrogance on his face, as he begged Yi Xian bitterly in a pool of blood. Buddha, please be wise. Juyo Tower is where the ferocious demons of heaven and earth are suppressed. Although Dipankara was in the wrong first, on account of his many years of service to the Buddhists of Mount Numinous, please punish him lightly. Duo Bao Rilai's face was pale, but he still forced a smile on his face as he pleaded with Yi Xian. After all, Dipankara Buddha had a very high status in Mount Numinous. If he was really locked in Juyo Tower, the Buddhas of Mount Numinous would be bitterly disappointed. And there was a saying that was very good. Without the lips, the teeth would feel cold. At this moment, Yi Xian's great power made Duo Bao Rilai tremble with fear. He knew that Mount Numinous would be led by Qing Ming Buddha from now on, and his and Dipankara's glory would no longer exist. Amitabha. Yi Xian chanted Buddha's name in a low voice, and a compassionate expression appeared on his face as he said, "My Buddhist sect is a pure place. We will not allow evil spirits to stay here. Dipankara has evil thoughts in his heart. If we don't convert his evil thoughts in time, wouldn't it be a disgrace to my Western Buddhist sect? Men, throw Dipankara Buddha into Juyo Tower. Only release him after 100,000 years have passed," Yi Xian said in a deep voice, not giving any face at all. Duo Bao Rilai's expression was hesitant. He was about to continue persuading Yi Xian, but when he saw Yi Xian's angry Vajra statue, he swallowed the words in his mouth. "Men, throw Dipankara into Juyo Tower," Duo Bao Rilai ordered sternly. He also got the two golden arhats to come over quickly. They directly lifted Dipankara Buddha and walked out of the great thunderclap temple, clearly wanting to throw him into Juyo Tower. Buddha Ching Ming's Buddhist teachings are profound. We are ashamed of our inferiority. We should listen to Buddha's proverbs every day. Only then can we improve our Buddhist nature, Duo Bao Rilai said with compassion. He clasped his hands together and bowed towards Yi Xian. The other bodhisattvas and Buddhas were the same. Everyone had a peaceful and benevolent expression on their faces. However, if one were to look carefully, they would discover that there was fear growing in their eyes. The dignified ancient Buddha Dipankara was suppressed in Juyo Tower. Even if he could be released after 100,000 years, could Dipankara come out alive? What kind of place was Juyo Tower? It was a forbidden area of Mount Numinous, and it was also the place where the evil spirits of heaven and earth were imprisoned. From the beginning of the primordial age to the present, countless evil spirits from ancient times had been suppressed in Juyo Tower. In order to show that the Western sect's Buddhist teachings were boundless, the two sages of the Western sect walked the primordial age in the primordial age. All the evil spirits were suppressed and locked in Juyo Tower. Until Kundi became a saint, the successive generations of Buddhas of Mount Numinous followed the ideals of the two sages of the Western sect and continued this tradition. All the evil spirits of heaven and earth were thrown into Juyo Tower and were never allowed to take half a step out of Juyo Tower. Of course, to be called evil spirits of heaven and earth, these people were extremely terrifying. The mere bodhisattvas and Buddhas of Mount Numinous naturally couldn't really suppress them. However, Juyo Tower was built by the two sages of the Western sect and had the power of a saint. These evil spirits of heaven and earth naturally couldn't escape. Now that Dipankara had been thrown into Juyo Tower, how could the evil spirits of heaven and earth in the tower let Dipankara off? Even if Dipankara did not die in the end, after 100,000 years, Dipankara would be like a lamp that had run out of oil. No one knew what would happen to him. To put it bluntly, Yi Xian had thrown Dipankara into Juyo Tower. This also meant that he had sentenced Dipankara to death. From then on, there would be no more people like Dipankara in the world. Listening to the Buddha's preaching and chanting filled the sky. Yi Xian was very generous, and he was extremely generous. He oversaw the great thunderclap temple of Mount Numinous and directly explained the various Buddhist teachings in the 10,000 Buddha scripture. There were also many great Buddhist mystical abilities that were bestowed to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of Mount Numinous. As the saying went, a carrot after a stick. This was the method that a superior should use. Although a superior's suppression would make people feel fearful, they would also harbor resentment in their hearts. Only a combination of kindness and authority was the way of a superior. The 10,000 Buddha scripture was written by the two sages of the Western sect. Not only did it contain the two sages of the Western sect's understanding of Buddhism, but it also contained many great mystical abilities of Buddhism that were unknown to others. Chapter 801. When Yi Xian generously and selflessly passed on these Buddhist magic skills to the Bodhisattvas and Buddhas of Holy Mountain of the West, they were so grateful that they shed tears and were in awe of Yi Xian. When they learned that the Buddhist magic skills taught by Yi Xian were created by the two sages of the West, Duo Bao Rulai, and the others were even more in awe of Yi Xian's identity. The Western religious sect was founded by the two sages of the West. Throughout the untainted land, no one had ever been so favored by the two sages of the West. Not only did the two sages of the West pass on the 10,000 Buddha scriptures to Yi Xian, but they also made him the first Buddha of Holy Mountain. From this, it could be seen that the relationship between Yi Xian and the two sages of the West was not simple. Duo Bao Rulai and the others naturally did not dare to have any disloyalty. Yi Xian only took one day to conquer Holy Mountain and make all the Bodhisattvas and Buddhas submit to him. This was both expected and unexpected. However, for Yi Xian, this was only the first step of his coming to Holy Mountain. Golden lotuses fell from the sky and sweet springs gushed from the ground. Golden lotuses bloomed all over Holy Mountain. Grass and trees grew rapidly, and the spiritual chi of heaven and earth rippled leisurely. The sound of the morning bell and evening drum echoed in Holy Mountain. It was like a country of Buddhas, giving people a sense of solemnity. In the Great Lane Temple, Yixian sat cross-legged on the golden lotus and preached. All the bodhisattvas and Buddhas were listening attentively. Everyone's face was solemn, because Yixian's Buddhist doctrine was unfathomable. They could always comprehend the true essence of Buddhism from Yixian's words. It could be said that they benefited a lot. However, what these bodhisattvas and Buddhas did not know was that Qing Ming, the Buddha in their eyes, was actually a peerless demon. If they knew Yixian's true identity and thought of the profound Buddhist ideas that Yixian preached today, everyone present would have a complicated mood. Amitabha, we pay our respects to Buddha Qing Ming. Suddenly, 4 deep and compassionate voices came from all directions. 4 rays of Buddha's light rose from Spirited Mountain and appeared in the Tempest Temple in an instant. The Buddhist light dissipated and the atmosphere was peaceful. 4 monks in golden kasayas stood in the great Thunderclap Temple. They put their palms together and bowed to Yixian, with a peaceful smile on their faces. The 4 great Buddhas of Mount Numinous, the Mahavairokkana, the Akalanatha, the Ratnasambhava, and the Amagasambhava were the 4 great Buddhas. They had lived for a very long time, and were the true pillars of the Western sect. Greetings, Buddhas. When the 4 great Buddhas arrived, Duobao Rilai's expression changed drastically. He quickly got up and bowed to the 4 great Buddhas. Many bodhisattvas and Buddhas of the great Thunderclap Temple also got up and bowed to the 4 great Buddhas. It was no wonder that the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain behaved like this. It was only because the 4 great Buddhas had never come out to the world and had always been cultivating in the depths of Spirited Mountain. Unless Spirited Mountain encountered a disaster, the 4 great Buddhas would never come out to the world. But today, the 4 great Buddhas came together to pay their respects to Yixian. How could this not make the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain extremely surprised? In fact, the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain did not know that the 4 great Buddhas had already known when Yixian entered Spirited Mountain. After all, the 2 sages of the West had sent Yixian to Spirited Mountain. How could they not take the 2 sages of the West seriously? And the most important thing was that Yixian had suppressed ancient Buddha Dipankara the moment he entered Spirited Mountain. He had even witnessed the miserable end of ancient Buddha Dipankara with his own eyes. This also made them uneasy. They did not dare to be pretentious anymore. Naturally, they had to lower their posture and pay their respects to Yixian. Sit. Yixian sat cross-legged on the Buddha's golden lotus and did not move. The expression on his face was neither sad nor happy, but it was full of Buddha nature. It was as if the arrival of the 4 great Buddhas would not move him at all. Looking at Yixian's indifferent posture, the 4 great Buddhas were stunned. Then, they looked at each other and saw each other's bitter smile. They did not show the slightest dissatisfaction and sat down cross-legged one after another. As the saying goes, kill the chicken to warn the monkey. This was the ancient truth. Yixian had suppressed ancient Buddha Dipankara. This not only gave the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain a great deterrent, but also gave the 4 great Buddhas a show of strength. How could they dare to act rashly in front of Yixian? There is no Bodhi tree, nor is there a bright mirror. Originally, there was nothing, so where did the dust come from? Seeing through the air, looking at the flowers in the fog, 3,000 eternal sands, flowing water like eternal brightness. The heavens were chanting sutras, and the sound of Buddhas. Yixian continued to preach. The 4 great Buddhas nodded slowly, and listened even more seriously to Yixian's preaching. The rest of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas were even more immersed in it. For a moment, the great Thunderclap Temple of Spirited Mountain was immersed in the vast Buddhist doctrine. Time flew by, and the years went by in a hurry. After a full 10 years, Yixian's preaching finally ended. The Buddha's light that filled the sky gradually dissipated. The 4 great Buddhas stood up first, and put their palms together to bow to Yixian. Qingming Buddha's Buddhist doctrine is profound. The 4 of us are ashamed of our inferiority. Under the leadership of Qingming Buddha, our Western sect will definitely prosper. The 4 great Buddhas chanted Buddha's name, and expressed their most sincere respect to Yixian. If the 4 great Buddhas were only afraid of Yixian's cultivation base before, they were now sincerely admiring Yixian. This was because Yi Xian's understanding of Buddhist doctrine was much higher than theirs. They were also greatly inspired by the Buddhist doctrine that Yi Xian imparted. Even their own cultivation base had a slight improvement. Qing Ming has followed the teachings of my two senior brothers. I intend to let the light of Buddha illuminate the three realms, and all those who violate the teachings of Buddhism are considered evil. Qing Ming will definitely sweep away all evil and evil, returning peace and prosperity to the world. Yi Xian put his palms together and spoke with a rumbling voice. A Buddha's light rose behind him and illuminated him to be boundlessly majestic. It was as if he was the only one in this world. After hearing Yi Xian's words and seeing Yi Xian's current attitude, the four great Buddhas couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Their eyes were even more solemn. As the saying goes, one can see the whole leopard from a single spot. Even though Buddha Qing Ming's Buddhist skills were profound and unfathomable, and he even displayed an unprecedented Buddha nature, he was way too stubborn towards Buddhism. To think that he would think that other than his Buddhist lineage, the rest of the world were all evil and unorthodox. This sort of mindset would most likely bring about a huge hidden danger to Spirit Mountain. Although the four great Buddhas cultivated the heart of Vajra glazed glass and were extremely indifferent to everything, this didn't mean that they were emotionless and desireless machines. Naturally, they could see that Yi Xian's temperament was too paranoid. They didn't know whether this was a good or bad thing for the Western sect. However, at this moment, Yi Xian was the first Buddha of Spirited Mountain. Naturally, the four great Buddhas didn't dare to question him. They could only acquiesce to Yi Xian's words. However, they were a little worried. If Buddha Qing Ming was really so paranoid, they didn't know what would happen in the future. The Buddhas of Spirited Mountain naturally didn't dare to have the slightest doubt. At this moment, they all bowed to Yi Xian to express their highest respect for Buddhist doctrine. Buddhist doctrine is boundless and can save all living beings. Today's teaching is over. You can disperse on your own. Yi Xian put his palms together and also asked the four great Buddhas to get up and leave. The Buddhas of Spirited Mountain also left one after another and returned to their own Taoist temples. Only Yi Xian was left sitting in the Great Lane Temple alone. There was no sadness or joy on his face. No one knew what he was thinking. Chapter 802. The Great Thunderclap Temple did not have a dome to cover it. Looking up, one could see the stars in the sky, and the surroundings were silent. Yi Xian wore a moon-white monk's robe as he sat cross-legged on the Buddha's golden lotus. He twirled a string of Buddha beads in his hand as he chanted the Vajra Sutra in a low voice. His peaceful and heavy chanting also slightly reverberated within the Great Thunderclap Temple. However, if someone were to stand in front of Yi Xian, they would be horrified to realize that Yi Xian's current expression was sinister. There was no sign of the peaceful and compassionate Buddhism at all. Juyo Tower? Suddenly, Yi Xian's chanting stopped abruptly. He blurted out these three words, and a strange smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Juyo Tower was not famous in the three realms. Very few people knew that Juyo Tower was a forbidden area in the Spirit Mountain, and it imprisoned many ferocious demons in the world. However, Yi Xian knew very well that the ferocious demons suppressed in Juyo Tower were all extraordinary beings. The one with the lowest cultivation level was Daoyuo Jingxian, and there were many sage-to-be figures among them. In the early years of the Eldritch Age, the two sages of the West subdued demons. How could the ferocious demons that they personally took action be ordinary people? There were a few forbidden areas in the world. Juyo Tower was one of them, and so was the 18 levels of hell. However, people only knew how terrifying the 18 levels of hell were, but they did not know that the ferocious demons in Juyo Tower were also extremely terrifying. Ferocious demons of the world. Interesting, very interesting. I wonder how capable these ferocious demons of the Eldritch Age are compared to me, a ferocious demon of the present world. Yi Xian stood up from the Buddha's golden lotus and walked out of the Great Thunderclap Temple against the starry sky. A ring of Buddha's light rose behind him, and his face became merciful and peaceful again. Juyo Tower was located in the deepest part of the Spirit Mountain. It was surrounded by a barren stone forest, and there was not a single bit of vegetation growing there. The pitch-black tower towered into the clouds and was hidden in the clouds, giving people the feeling that they were looking at flowers in the fog. Yi Xian stood below the Juyo Tower and smiled as he looked at the entire Juyo Tower. Buddhist suppressions were engraved on the tower's body, as if they were golden chains. A stone door that was as black as ink. 2 arhats stood on both sides of the door. It was obvious that this was the door to the Juyo Tower. When the 2 arhats saw Yi Xian appear here, they nervously bowed towards him. Buddha. Yes. Yi Xian nodded. From the beginning to the end, a peaceful smile hung on his face, giving off a harmless feeling. Reporting to Buddha, Randang has already been sent into Juyo Tower. He definitely won't be able to escape. Buddha, don't worry. One of the arhats said with a flattering smile. Open Juyo Tower. Yi Xian took a deep look at the dark door. His voice was still calm and steady, giving people a feeling of a spring breeze. Open. Open Juyo Tower? Hearing Yi Xian's words, the 2 arhats were stunned. Then their expressions changed drastically. Buddha, you can't do that. Juyo Tower has imprisoned all the ferocious demons of the world for generations. You are the #1 Buddha of Spirit Mountain. How can you be tainted by the filthy aura of these ferocious demons? Open it. Yi Xian frowned, and the smile on his face gradually disappeared. This also made the 2 arhats' expressions change slightly. They looked at each other, and could only do as Yi Xian said. After all, Yi Xian was the true ruler of Spirit Mountain. Buzz. 2 demons subduing golden seals were sent out by the 2 arhats. They instantly merged into the dark door, causing Juyo Tower to undergo a miraculous change. Rumble. Juyo Tower seemed to be shaking. The Buddhist proverbs engraved on the tower seemed to be illusory. Following a loud rumble, the dark door slowly opened. Roar. Suddenly the heavens and earth shook, and the void shook. Black wind rolled around the open Juyo Tower, and a thick smell of blood spewed out. It was like an abyss of hell that chose people to devour. The terrifying ferocious demon's roar made one's soul tremble. The 2 arhats were drenched in cold sweat, and they kept retreating in fear. Buddha. The 2 arhats cried out in a trembling voice. They wanted to quickly close the door. Clearly, the ferocious demons of heaven and earth in Juyo Tower were too terrifying. Opening the door for even a second longer would cause great danger. If a ferocious demon of heaven and earth really escaped from Juyo Tower, the entire Spirit Mountain would suffer an unimaginable calamity. Great. Yi Xian smiled slightly, but there was a hint of ferocity on his face. There was also a hint of excitement in his eyes. Under the shocked gazes of the 2 arhats, Yi Xian actually strode into Juyo Tower. Buddha, you can't enter Juyo Tower. The 2 arhats shouted anxiously. They never thought that Yi Xian would actually risk his life to enter Juyo Tower. It was no wonder that the 2 arhats were so worried. Juyo Tower was where the ferocious demons of heaven and earth were suppressed. These demons were extremely terrifying. Moreover, it wasn't just these demons. Juyo Tower also had heavenly lightning and earthly fire. Even a sage-to-be would suffer a great calamity if they entered. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't seem to hear the 2 arhats' dissuasion. He entered Juyo Tower under the shocked gazes of the 2 arhats. As the dark door closed with a rumble, Yi Xian disappeared from their eyes just like that. Oh no. Buddha Qingming actually entered Juyo Tower. Let's quickly report this to the other Buddhas. The 2 arhats looked at each other and saw the solemn look in each other's eyes. They didn't dare to delay any longer. They immediately transformed into 2 streaks of light and left. It was obvious that they were going to report the matter of Yi Xian entering Juyo Tower to the various Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Juyo Tower was where the ferocious demons of heaven and earth were suppressed. Even if the various Buddhas of Spirit Mountain captured some demons and threw them into Juyo Tower, they would only act in the outside world. They would never dare to enter Juyo Tower themselves. This was because anyone who entered Juyo Tower had never come out. At this moment, Yi Xian risked his life to enter Juyo Tower. This was simply an act of seeking death. If anything really happened to him, the various Buddhas of the West would definitely bear a huge responsibility. How would they explain it to the 2 sages of the West? Juyo Tower. Woo woo woo. A foul wind rolled in the air. The bone-melting astral wind whistled in Juyo Tower. It was impossible to see the end of the dark space. A straight and wide path extended upwards. From time to time, one could see piles of white bones lying on the ground. Roar! Numerous terrifying ghostly figures suddenly appeared above Yi Xian's head. Their bloody eyes were abnormally terrifying in the darkness. Eerie laughter came from their mouths as they pounced and bit at Yi Xian crazily. Demons and monsters, you're courting death. Yi Xian laughed coldly. The Buddha's light of the great sun suddenly exploded, instantly turning these ghosts into wisps of white smoke. Miserable screams could be heard from the area. Ba! Yi Xian's grayish-white hair fell behind his head. He was wearing a white monk robe as he strolled forward. The Buddha's light around him was dazzling like a golden sun, illuminating the dark space around him. Wisps of black smoke exploded with a bang. The ghosts hiding in the darkness screamed miserably. It was obvious that the Buddha's light of the great sun on Yi Xian was their nemesis. Even the slightest touch would bring them great calamity. Chapter 803. The ghosts howled in agony as the Yin wind dissipated. Yi Xian strolled forward, following the staircase to the second floor of Juyo Tower. Juyo Tower had 9 floors in total, imprisoning many ferocious demons of heaven and earth, as well as some demons and ghosts. Ferocious demons of heaven and earth was just a general term. There were immortals and demons among them. Every one of them was considered a scourge of an era. Kid, you're covered in Buddhist light. Did you make a huge mistake in Spirit Mountain? Is that why you're imprisoned in Juyo Tower? Yi Xian had just stepped onto the second floor when a black crow flapped its wings and flew toward Yi Xian. The crow was completely black, and its eyes were green and cold. As soon as it got close to Yi Xian, an extremely cold qi filled the space. A variant of heaven and earth, the 9 moons jackdaw? Yi Xian looked at the black crow, and a trace of surprise flashed through his eyes. One had to know that there were too many strange beasts in the Great Desolate Era. However, in this world, these strange beasts were either dead or had disappeared without a trace. The 9 moons jackdaw was an extremely rare strange beast, and it even had an extremely terrifying great ability. Yi Xian hadn't expected to see a 9 moons jackdaw in Juyo Tower. The 9 moons jackdaw's cold qi was so dense, and its cultivation was already at the peak of the zenith heaven realm. If it were in the 3 realms, it would definitely be a revered figure. Hee, at least you're knowledgeable. Why don't you greet your grandpa jackdaw? The 9 moons jackdaw sneered arrogantly. It sized up Yi Xian with an extremely playful look, like a cat toying with a mouse. Little bird, you're quite interesting. How dare you be so impudent to me? Yi Xian wasn't angry. Instead, he smiled. While the 9 moons jackdaw was still in a daze, he reached out his hand. This caused the 9 moons jackdaw to come to its senses, and an extremely terrifying and fierce qi erupted. What an arrogant little baldy! How dare you play with me? Roar! The 9 moons jackdaw was a variant of the heavens and the earth, and its innate ability was the 9 yin frost water. This ability was extremely terrifying, and even Daluo Jingxian didn't dare to touch it in the slightest. Otherwise, his body would definitely be transformed into ice shards, and his soul would be destroyed. The 9 moons jackdaw was truly enraged now. It spat out a mouthful of 9 yin frost water, and the terrifying coldness instantly froze Yi Xian into an ice sculpture. His entire body was frozen to the spot. Little monk, why don't you take a look at what kind of place Juyo Tower is? Once you enter this place, all of you will never be able to reincarnate. The 9 nether jackdaw sneered and turned into a girl in black. She skipped around Yi Xian, as if she was admiring a beautiful work of art. Crack! Suddenly, a strange sound rang out. September Jackdaw's expression froze, and her eyes widened. She retreated a dozen steps, because what happened next caused her to tremble to the extreme. Bang! Bang! There was an explosion in the air, and the Buddhist light was awe-inspiring. The ice sculpture Yi Xian had turned into shattered, and his original body was revealed. He was looking at the 9 moons jackdaw indifferently. The 9 yin frost water is only SO. Yi Xian whispered as he slowly walked towards the 9 moons jackdaw. It was also at this moment that the 9 moons jackdaw let out a shrill cry and turned into a ray of black light that was about to flee towards the upper levels of Juyo Tower. Terrifying, too terrifying. This little monk actually ignored the 9 frost water and directly broke out of the ice. This caused the 9 moons jackdaw's soul to leave her body. One had to know that her 9 frost water could freeze everything, and all living things would suffer a destructive blow. Even the quasi-saint monk who'd come in earlier had been frozen into an ice sculpture. Although this was caused by the fact that he was seriously injured and on the verge of death, it also proved how terrifying the 9 frost water was. Even a quasi-saint body couldn't withstand it. Come. In the void of 10,000 Buddhas, Buddha country in a palm, eternal sand flowed and disappeared. Yi Xian reached out with his palm and directly used the Buddha country in a palm that he'd just cultivated. Instantly, the space around them was destroyed. The 9 moons jackdaw felt like she was sinking into a quagmire, and many illusions of the Buddha country appeared in her eyes. Rumble. The 10,000 Dharma Buddhist kingdom, a dream of Bodhi, and the Buddhist kingdom in the palm were the divine abilities of the 2 saints of the West. Although Yi Xian wasn't a saint, when he used this kind of saint technique, even a quasi-saint wouldn't be able to escape, let alone a mere 9 moons jackdaw. Ah! An ear-piercing scream came from the mouth of the 9 moons jackdaw. She once again transformed into her original form, but at this moment, she was tightly held in Yi Xian's hand. Her flapping wings were extremely flustered, and her eyes were filled with extreme fear. "Father, save me!" The 9 moons jackdaw screamed for help. Her trembling, choked voice echoed throughout the Juyo Tower. At that moment, Juyo Tower suddenly shook, and an unimaginable cold light of heaven and earth pressed down on Yi Xian. "Little monk, let go of my daughter." The world was cold, and the laws froze. The voice was ancient and cold, and filled with an eternal chill. The power of the laws in the air was suppressed, and an extremely violent ice law turned into a prison that trapped Yi Xian. I beat up the young one, and now an old one comes? Yi Xian was slightly taken aback. With his cultivation, he could sense that the person who attacked him was a quasi-saint. Based on the feeling of his aura, it was the same as the 9 moons jackdaw in his hand. The two must be closely related. "Let go of me, or my father will definitely kill you." The 9 moons jackdaw shouted coldly. Cold light flashed around her, and she transformed into the black-clothed girl again. She struggled in Yi Xian's hand, and an extremely terrifying cold light spread out, trying to freeze Yi Xian and escape from his grasp. Noisy. Rumble. Yi Xian frowned. He was not a person who would go easy on girls. He raised his hand and slapped the black-clothed girl's cheek. Slap. A loud slap sounded out, accompanied by an ear-piercing scream. A 5-fingered red mark clearly appeared on the black-clothed girl's fair face, and her delicate neck was grabbed by Yi Xian. At this moment, she was completely dumbfounded on the spot. You dare to hit me, you dare to hit me? Not even my parents have ever hit me. I'm going to kill you." 3 breaths of time passed, and the black-clothed girl's icy face turned red. She completely forgot that her life was still in Yi Xian's hands. She transformed into an irascible girl, waving her hands in an attempt to attack Yi Xian. Slap. Yi Xian frowned as he slapped the other side of the black-clothed girl's face. The loud slap was exceptionally ear-piercing, causing the black-clothed girl to cover her cheeks in a daze on the spot. "If you dare to make any more noise, this monk will make sure you die without a grave. Do you understand?" Yi Xian smiled, and his fingers slowly tightened. The girl's face immediately turned purple, and fear appeared in her eyes once more. Her beautiful eyes became misty, and she struggled in pain in midair. "How dare you? You're courting death." With a heaven-shaking roar and extreme fury, a cold figure arrived with a loud bang. The cold light of heaven and earth transformed into a torrent of laws that directly shot towards Yi Xian. From the looks of it, it was as if he had a blood feud with Yi Xian. Chapter 804. Trying to show off in front of an expert. Yi Xian's sword finger was like the sky as it pointed towards the person. The stream of laws shattered inch by inch, and the 5-fingered giant hand crushed the void, freezing the world and the person in place. "Father!" A piercing scream came from the black-clothed girl. A middle-aged man in a cold robe was half-kneeling on the ground, looking at Yi Xian in shock. One strike. With just one strike, the cold-clothed man's great technique was broken, and he was seriously injured. He could not believe it, but the extreme pain from the collapsed ribs in his chest proved that he had suffered a terrible blow. Who are you? The cold-clothed man slowly stood up and looked at Yi Xian with a heavy expression. Fear clearly flashed through his eyes because he was a quasi-saint, yet he was injured by a single strike from his opponent. The cultivation of this person was simply terrifying to the extreme. My Dharma name is Qing Ming. Yi Xian smiled peacefully, but he still held the black-clothed girl's neck, giving off a harmless vibe. I am Feng Han. Greetings, fellow Taoist. You have a profound cultivation, and you are at the peak of the sage-to-be. Please let my daughter go, and we can discuss anything. The cold-clothed man cupped his hands and forced a smile. Feng Han, the first 9 moons Jackdo at the beginning of the world, was born as Daluo Jingxian. He had done many evil things during the primeval age, and was suppressed by Zhuanti with the Tree of 7 Wonders. He had been locked in Juyo Tower for countless years. Although he was not famous in the 3 realms, his cultivation was extraordinary. Unfortunately, although Feng Han was very strong, he had met Yi Xian. After one strike, Feng Han had determined that he was not a match for Yi Xian. He had even lowered his posture, wanting to stall Yi Xian first. Who is in charge of Juyo Tower? Yi Xian casually tossed the girl in black to Feng Han, who quickly caught his daughter in his arms. Then, he quickly shielded the girl in black behind him. He looked at Yi Xian in surprise. Feng Han thought that Yi Xian would use his daughter as a hostage, but he did not expect that Yi Xian would not even bother to do so. Instead, he let his daughter go. This person was not simple. Feng Han's expression was extremely solemn, and the vigilance in his eyes intensified. This was Juyo Tower, and the other party had just entered this place. If he dared to act like this, he must be extremely capable. Otherwise, why would he dare to act like this? Have you heard of Skyless Buddha? Feng Han said in a low voice, looking straight at Yi Xian. Obviously, he was observing Yi Xian's reaction. Skyless Buddha? Yi Xian was slightly startled, because he had never heard of this name. A friend has come from afar. Please come into the tower for a chat. Suddenly, a hoarse voice came from the depths of Juyo Tower. It was accompanied by the faint roar of a demon. This made Feng Han and his daughter slightly startled. They did not expect Skyless Buddha to speak in person. This is interesting. Yi Xian smiled slightly, and a strange look flashed across his eyes. Friend, please. Feng Han immediately came back to his senses and gestured to Yi Xian. Then, he pulled the girl in black and led the way forward. Obviously, he was leading the way for Yi Xian. Yi Xian strolled behind Feng Han, as if he was strolling in a courtyard, like the spring wind and rain. The Buddhist light around him was still peaceful, without the slightest hint of nervousness. Juyo Tower had 9 floors. Each floor was extremely wide and had its own space. From time to time, he could see mysterious Buddhist scriptures engraved on the walls and under his feet. He did not know what they were for. Along the way, Yi Xian did not see a single living creature on each floor of Juyo Tower. When he arrived at the 9th floor under the guidance of Feng Han and his daughter, a door made of black fog appeared in front of Yi Xian. Skyless Buddha is inside. Friend, please come in. Feng Han turned sideways slightly and glanced at Yi Xian. Then, he led the girl in black into the door made of black fog. With just one glance, Yi Xian could feel countless fierce eyes staring at him from behind the door. There was also a boundless murderous aura faintly rippling from the door. A trace of a smile appeared on the corner of Yi Xian's mouth. He took a step forward and entered the 9th floor without the slightest bit of fear. The 9th floor of Juyo Tower. The murderous aura was boundless, and the murderous aura was monstrous. The low growls of ferocious demons were constantly heard. Boundless black clouds spread throughout the 9th floor. Countless pairs of fierce eyes stared at Yi Xian. There was also a green ghost fire floating in the void, giving off a strange and eerie feeling. If it was just this eerie and terrifying scene in front of him, it would not have surprised Yi Xian. What really surprised Yi Xian was the various ferocious demons sitting cross-legged on the 9th floor, and the young man in black leading them. Black lotuses bloomed in the void, and the murderous aura was boundless. Dark red blood pools were spread out in all directions, and black lotuses rippled in the void. On each black lotus sat a ferocious demon. Demonic Buddha? When he saw the scene in front of him, Yi Xian was slightly startled, and a look of surprise flashed across his eyes. Although the ferocious demons present were of different shapes, including demonic immortals, demon clans, and even monsters and ghosts, without exception, everyone was in the exact same position as the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain. If it were not for the boundless murderous aura of these ferocious demons, Yi Xian would have thought that he was in the great thunderclap temple of Spirited Mountain if they were covered by the Buddhist light. Moreover, Yi Xian also saw a familiar person. This person was the ancient Buddha Dipankara, who was locked in Juyo Tower by Yi Xian. However, at this moment, the ancient Buddha Dipankara no longer had the kind Buddhist light from before. Instead, it was replaced by a ferocious demonic aura. He stared at Yi Xian with a gloomy face. Skyless Buddha. This person is the junior brother of the two sages of the West. His Buddhist name is Qing Ming, and he was the one who locked me in Juyo Tower. Dipankara put his palms together and bowed to the leading black-clothed youth. The black-clothed youth had a fair complexion and gave people a scholarly and elegant temperament. He did not show any power, but he was sitting cross-legged on a 12th-grade black lotus, smiling elegantly at Yi Xian. Behind the black-clothed youth, countless ferocious demons were staring at Yi Xian covetously. The one with the lowest cultivation was Daoyuo Jingxian, and there were as many as 10 sage to be. When these ferocious demons of heaven and earth gathered together, they released an aura that could shatter one's soul. Qing Ming, my young friend, I have never heard of Kundi Jane having a junior brother. What is your relationship with them? Skyless asked with a smile. Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not answer Skyless' question. Instead, he stared at this person with a frown. This was because Yi Xian felt an extremely pure devil qi from him. Although this person tried to hide it, Yi Xian's cultivation was too terrifying, and his spiritual sense was extremely sensitive. Even if the other party tried to hide it, Yi Xian could vaguely guess his origin. Chaotic devil qi? Yi Xian murmured to himself. Then he looked up at Skyless and said, "What is your relationship with the demon ancestor Luo Ho?" Chapter 805. As Yi Xian's words fell, Wu Tian's expression changed slightly. Then he regained his composure and smiled. "You must be joking. I was born from heaven and earth. How could I be related to the demon ancestor?" Ha! Yi Xian smiled and did not continue to ask. Since the other party wanted to hide his identity, there was no need for Yi Xian to pursue the matter. After all, his purpose here was not to pry into Wu Tian's secrets. Amitabha. Yi Xian chanted a Buddhist chant, and the Buddhist light around his body suddenly blazed. It was as resplendent as a golden sun, and the Buddhist light that shone out caused some of the weaker fiendish demons to let out terrified cries. Humph! Wu Tian snorted coldly. With a wave of his hand, he brought about boundless killing intent that instantly offset Yi Xian's light of Buddha. However, he looked at Yi Xian more seriously. "My friend, since you have entered Juyo Tower, we are family from now on. Are you trying to show off to me by doing this?" Wu Tian's voice turned cold. "You're wrong. This penniless monk is not trying to intimidate you. This penniless monk is telling you a fact. From now on, all of you have to submit to me. This penniless monk will also bring all of you out of Juyo Tower." Yi Xian spoke indifferently. He looked at Wu Tian calmly. However, when he finished speaking, the void suddenly fell silent, and the atmosphere became extremely strange. What a joke! Suddenly, a cold laugh was heard. Dipankara Buddha stood up and pointed at Yi Xian. He growled, "Qing Ming, you can deceive others but you can't deceive me. Juyo Tower is the magic treasure of the two sages of the West. It has been suppressing everyone here. Unless the two sages of the West take action personally, we will never be able to leave this place. Little bald thief, you have guts. How dare you deceive us? Don't you know how to write the word death?" A demon of heaven and earth spoke. Waves of ruthless aura bloomed and surrounded Yi Xian in the center. It was as if they were going to attack Yi Xian in the next moment. "My friend Qing Ming, if you don't give me a reasonable explanation, I am afraid today will be the day you die," Wu Tian said coldly. Wu Tian said coldly. A black lotus blossomed above his head. Strands of strange demonic light rippled out, and trapped the void in all directions. Black runes spread out in the void, interweaving into a terrifying killing matrix. Boom! The void exploded and thunder rumbled. The entire Geo Tower, 10 demons. 10 demons of heaven and earth got up. And the space. It was an extremely terrifying killing intent. Wuxian was the leader of the 10 great demons. Wuxian was the leader, and there were other demons comparable to Daoyuo Jingxian surrounding Yi Xian. It seemed that Yi Xian was also in great danger. If it was in the past, Yi Xian might have felt an extremely great threat. However, after he passed through the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao, he was definitely an invincible existence amongst the quasi-sages. The formation set up by these fiendish demons wasn't able to scare him. Yi Xian, you are all really ignorant. Suddenly, an extremely terrifying thing happened. Yi Xian said coldly. The Buddhist light around him suddenly dissipated, and a sinister expression appeared on his face. The ancient killing intent suddenly exploded, and an extremely terrifying chaotic fog surrounded Yi Xian. A bunch of clowns. How dare you be so presumptuous in front of me? Boom! Yi Xian raised his palm. It was as if he was lifting the heavens and earth. The surrounding power of laws exploded, turning the void into a vacuum. As he slammed his palm out, the entire Juyo Tower shook violently, as if it was about to collapse. Puff! 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 Blood splattered across the sky. Yi Xian's palm was too terrifying. Not only did it contain the power of his physical body, but it also contained his Dharma and Tao. It directly sent the 10 great demons flying. Blood spurted out of their mouths, and the murderous light around them shattered inch by inch. Bang! 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 A series of rumbling noises rang out as terrifying demonic light rippled out. Countless ferocious demons exploded into clouds of blood mist, and miserable howls rang out incessantly. Stomp! 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 Wuxian believed that his cultivation was at the peak of the sage-to-be. Even the 2 demon emperors of the ancient demon court were not inferior to him. However, under Yi Xian's attack, his palm was distorted to the extreme, and he was forced to retreat continuously. This was because he could not resist Yi Xian's attack. Buzz! Space was destroyed, and it collapsed and reassembled. Although Yi Xian was not a saint, he definitely surpassed a sage-to-be. This was also the terror of his path of proving Tao through strength. He, who had passed the first tribulation of the heavenly way, was not comparable to a sage-to-be. If one had to make a conclusion about Yi Xian's cultivation, he could be called a sage-to-be. As long as he could pass the third tribulation of the heavenly way, his cultivation would not be weaker than that of a saint. Buzz! Space seemed to be frozen, and the laws of heaven and earth were disappearing. Surging devilish light rippled around Yi Xian's body, and the ancient ferocious pressure caused people to be unable to breathe. As for Yi Xian, he was currently looking at these fiendish demons with a playful expression. Demons of heaven and earth? Ridiculous, extremely ridiculous. In front of Yi Xian, the so-called demons of heaven and earth were no different from ants. If these people were called demons of heaven and earth, then Yi Xian was the demon of all demons. Even the demon ancestor Luo Ho would feel inferior in front of him. Yi Xian had been cultivating for hundreds of thousands of years. Along the way, he had experienced countless disasters. Everything he had done was earth-shattering. These demons suppressed in the Juyo Tower paled in comparison to him. You pieces of trash. If it weren't for the fact that you still have some use, I wouldn't have the time to dawdle with you. Now you only have 2 choices. You can either submit to me, or all of you can die here. Rumble! The ancient ferocious aura was boundless. Yi Xian was surrounded by chaotic fog, but his appearance was gradually changing. Finally, he returned to his original appearance, and he was looking at Wuxian with a sinister expression. It's you! Suddenly, an extremely terrifying scream sounded out. Dipankara's teeth were trembling, and his footsteps were extremely unsteady. He even unconsciously retreated, but his gaze towards Yi Xian was filled with extreme fear. Yi Xian? You are Yi Xian? How is this possible? Weren't you suppressed in the Western Paradise by the 2 sages of the West? How? Dipankara's body and mind trembled. An extremely horrified scream came from his mouth, which also proved how terrified he was. It was no wonder that Dipankara was like this. Yi Xian was definitely the most terrifying person in the world. Other than the sages who could punish him. He led the battle between the two great celestial court, turned hundreds of millions of miles of mountains and rivers into ashes, and even pierced through the sky, causing the three realms to suffer a boundless catastrophe. What was even more terrifying was that Yi Xian dared to insult and attack the sages. No one could compare with Yi Xian in this kind of fierce and boundless behavior. Who is Yi Xian? Wuxian asked in surprise. He kept looking at Yi Xian. Dipankara's fearful appearance meant that he must be an extremely terrifying person. Otherwise, how could he make Dipankara so afraid? After all, Dipankara was a pre-saint. To make a pre-saint so afraid, the other party's background was probably unimaginable. Either submit or die. I will only give you 10 breaths of time to consider. After 10 breaths, if you still don't agree, you can all die in Juyo Tower, Yi Xian said coldly. Yi Xian said coldly. Since he'd chosen to reveal his identity, he had to subdue these fiendish devils. This was also related to his future plans. If these fiendish devils would rather die than submit, Yi Xian wouldn't mind killing them all. Chapter 806. Hiss! Gasps could be heard continuously. No one thought that Yi Xian was joking, because the murderous aura around Yi Xian was too terrifying. There was no trace of the Buddhist glory from before. At this moment, Yi Xian was staring at Wuxian and the others with a gloomy face. Extremely sinister murderous intent flashed in his eyes. He didn't have time to waste on Wuxian and the others. If these demons weren't useful to him, he wouldn't have bothered to enter Juyo Tower. After passing the first tribulation of the heavenly way, Yi Xian could be said to be invincible among pre-saints. However, he was alone and couldn't do everything himself. The demons in Juyo Tower were perfect for him to use, and this was only the first step for Yi Xian. 10 breaths of time quickly passed. Wu Tian and the others had unsettled expressions. It was obvious that they hadn't decided whether to submit to Yi Xian or not. However, when Yi Xian revealed a vicious smile, Wu Tian's hair instantly stood on end. An extremely terrifying feeling arose from the bottom of his heart. We are willing to submit, Wu Tian said solemnly. Wu Tian spoke in a heavy voice as he quickly bowed towards Yi Xian. This caused the expressions of many of the fiendish demons to greatly change, as they looked at Wu Tian with disbelief in their eyes. Uncle Wu Tian, you can't do this. Even if he's a pre-saint, he's just one person. If we join forces and take him down, he'll definitely die. The 9 Moons Jackdaw, who had transformed into a girl in black, said anxiously. She couldn't understand why Wu Tian, who had such a powerful cultivation, would submit to Yi Xian. Yes, Buddha, let's kill him, another demon growled. He looked like he was going to attack Yi Xian. Shut up. Suddenly, Fang Han let out a low roar, which calmed the ferocious demons of heaven and earth. I'm Yi Xian. I'm willing to submit to you. From now on, I'll be at your beck and call. I won't dare to betray you. Fang Han hurriedly bowed to Yi Xian. Greetings, Yi Tiandi. The 10 great fiendish demons quickly returned and bowed towards Yi Xian with reverence. When this scene appeared, the numerous fiendish demons of the heavens and earth were completely silent. An extremely strange atmosphere was born. They couldn't understand. Yi Xian had only attacked once, and seemed to have the upper hand. However, they had so many people. How could they not kill Yi Xian? A wise man submits to circumstances. You know your limits. The sinister look on Yi Xian's face was gone. Wu Tian and the 10 great demons were nodded in approval. And the 10 great demons? In fact, these weak demons didn't know that when Yi Xian sent Wu Tian and the 10 great pre-saints flying with one attack, it proved Yi Xian's terrifying cultivation. Pre-saints understood pre-saints. Wu Tian and the others could feel Yi Xian's horror. Yi Xian had only attacked once, but it made them feel like their lives were in his hands. A sense of inferiority and powerlessness grew in their hearts. Those who could become pre-saints were all extraordinary people. Each of them had an extraordinary intuition about death. They couldn't be wrong. If they really didn't agree to submit to Yi Xian, their souls would scatter in the next moment. People didn't want to die. Even these demons who had become pre-saints were no exception. Wu Tian had a great secret. He couldn't die here. With Wu Tian and the 10 great demons taking the lead to submit, the rest of the demons with the cultivation of Daoyuo Jingxian didn't dare to refute. They all knelt down and kowtowed to Yi Xian. Good. The chaotic fog dissipated, and the evil spirit collapsed without a trace. Yi Xian's Buddha light rose behind him again. His face also showed a kind and benevolent smile. At this moment, except for Wu Tian and the other demons who submitted to Yi Xian, Dipankara had already collapsed to the ground. He looked at Yi Xian with despair in his eyes. Dipankara knew that Yi Xian would not let him go when Yi Xian exposed his identity. He would definitely die today. Dipankara, don't you want to introduce me to my origin? Yi Xian looked at Dipankara with a smile. He didn't kill him immediately. Instead, there was a playful look on his face. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Dipankara's expression changed. He nodded and began to introduce Yi Xian's identity to the other demons. Yi Xian Yi Tiandi, he was. As Dipankara slowly introduced Yi Xian's identity, Wu Tian and the others listened carefully. However, as Dipankara introduced Yi Xian in more depth, Wu Tian and the others gradually became serious and shocked. After an hour, when Dipankara finished his introduction, Wu Tian and the others' breath stagnated. Obviously, they hadn't recovered from the shock. What does Yi Tiandi want us to do for you? Fang Han cupped his hands and asked Yi Xian tentatively. I will tell you what I need to tell you. You don't need to know what I don't want you to know. Do you understand? Yi Xian said indifferently. As Yi Xian's words fell, Fang Han's expression changed slightly. He smiled flatteringly and retreated. He could see that Yi Tiandi acted arbitrarily. If he wanted to test him, he would only be asking for trouble. Yi Tiandi's cultivation is unparalleled. Even Donghuang Tai and Di Jun are no match for him. However, I have a question that I need you to answer. Wu Tian cupped his hands and said, What is it? Yi Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at Wu Tian. This Juyo Tower was built by the 2 sages of the West specifically to imprison us. Even if we are willing to follow the Celestial Arch, I wonder how the Celestial Arch is going to bring us out of this place? Wu Tian directly asked the most important question. That's right. Juyo Tower was built by the sages. If you want to release us, the 2 sages of the West have to open the seal personally, a demon echoed. At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Yi Xian. They also wanted to see how Yi Xian would help them regain their freedom. After all, they had been imprisoned here for countless years, and had long lost the hope of breaking out of the tower. Yi Xian could completely feel the complicated emotions of these fiendish demons. However, he lightly smiled and didn't say anything. Instead, his eyes rotated as he looked at the Juyo Tower beneath his feet. Oh no, it's time. The heavenly lightning and earthly fire are about to appear. Suddenly, before Yi Xian could reply, Wu Tian seemed to have thought of something. His face darkened instantly. Just as he finished speaking, Juyo Tower underwent a terrifying change. Chi chi chi. The void swayed, and the light of Buddha appeared. The originally calm Juyo Tower suddenly shook. Golden patterns spread in all directions in the void, interweaving into an extremely bright light of Buddha formation, filling every corner of Juyo Tower with a loud bang. At that moment, Wu Tian and the others suddenly sat cross-legged in the void. Extremely terrifying evil aura erupted from their bodies and instantly covered them. Chapter 807. Crack. The entire hall was filled with white lightning. Streaks of terrifying azure lightning were born out of thin air. The floor paved with black jade crystals instantly turned extremely red, and an extremely terrifying underground fire surged out of it. The heavenly thunder and earthly fire were irreversible. This was the heavenly thunder and earthly fire in Juyo Tower, and it was the embodiment of the origin saint power of the 2 Western sages. Even a sage-to-be would be greatly threatened by the heavenly thunder and earthly fire. Ah! Shrill screams were heard. The appearance of the heavenly thunder and earthly fire was too sudden. Some of the weaker ferocious demons of heaven and earth were drowned by the heavenly thunder and earthly fire before they could react. Their bodies were scorched, and their pale bones were exposed. They screamed in extreme pain. Rumble! The heavenly thunder and earthly fire surged. Countless ferocious demons rolled on the ground, and their miserable screams were heard continuously. Only a few ferocious demons of heaven and earth with powerful cultivation were able to withstand the heavenly thunder and earthly fire. They did not look well either. The heavenly thunder and earthly fire appeared once every 1,000 years. Today happened to be the 1,000-year period. Previously, Wuxian and the others had been focused on Yi Xian and had forgotten about this matter. The appearance of the heavenly thunder and earthly fire now caught them off guard. "Father, save me." The girl in black was drowned in earthly fire, and terrifying lightning kept striking her body. She screamed in despair. "Damn it!" Fang Han roared. He formed the frost seal of heaven and earth and struck it toward the girl in black, hoping to help her resist the heavenly thunder and earthly fire. But the thing that made him helpless was that the heavenly thunder and earthly fire contained a trace of the origin saint power of the two Western sages. It was not something that a sage-to-be like Fang Han could extinguish. "Father," the heavenly thunder and earthly fire became more and more terrifying. The girl in black was already scorched. If she delayed for a few more seconds, she would definitely die tragically in the heavenly thunder and earthly fire. Thump, thump, thump. Suddenly, the sound of light footsteps could be heard. A figure was walking amidst the heavenly lightning and earthly fire. When this scene appeared in front of Fang Han's eyes, Fang Han was stunned. Then he shouted excitedly, "Yi Tiandi, please save my daughter. I, Fang Han, will never forget Heaven Emperor's kindness. From now on, I will do anything to repay Heaven Emperor." Yi Xian's Buddhist light dissipated. His entire body seemed to be bathed in heavenly thunder and earthly fire. He smiled faintly and slowly walked towards the black-clothed girl. What happened next caused the numerous demons to go into an uproar. Woo woo woo. The heavenly lightning and earthly fire that engulfed the black-clothed girl suddenly dispersed. It was as if Yi Xian's arrival had caused the heavenly lightning and earthly fire to become extremely fearful. They all rushed towards the other ominous devils, directly turning the area around Yi Xian into a safe vacuum zone. Thank you, Heavenly Emperor." The black-clothed girl's hair had been burned, and her body was extremely withered. She crawled on the ground weakly and thanked Yi Xian. Her eyes no longer had the arrogant look from before. "You should thank your father. If he had not agreed to do anything for me, I would not have saved you." Yi Xian smiled faintly. However, his smile was extremely strange, causing the black-clothed girl to feel an even greater sense of fear. "Heaven Emperor, save me. Yi Tiandi, save me. I don't want to die." When Yi Xian saved the black-clothed girl, the ominous devils engulfed by the heavenly lightning and earthly fire all cried out for help. However, what made them despair was that Yi Xian did not move or speak with his hands behind his back. He did not even have the slightest intention of saving them. If you can't even withstand a mere heavenly lightning and earthly fire, then you are really a bunch of trash. "What use do I have for you?" Yi Xian said with a smile. However, his voice was extremely cold and vicious, and there was not the slightest bit of humanity in it. Yi Xian was not a kind person. He did not enter Jiuyou Tower to save these ominous devils. What he wanted were powerful subordinates. The appearance of the heavenly lightning and earthly fire happened to be able to select the most powerful ones for him. The weak could only die in the heavenly lightning and earthly fire. Only the fittest survived. Yi Xian had always believed in this truth. Thus, he calmly watched these ominous devils resist the heavenly lightning and earthly fire. He had no intention of saving them at all. Time passed slowly. After 3 days and 3 nights, the heavenly lightning and earthly fire slowly dissipated, and Jiuyou Tower returned to its peaceful state. Huff, 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 violent panting sounds came from everywhere. A large number of white bones were piled up on the ground. More than half of the ominous devils had died tragically in the heavenly lightning and earthly fire this time. The remaining half were panting violently. They had all suffered different degrees of injuries. "Yi Xian, why didn't you save them? They have just submitted to you." Suddenly, a snake-headed quasi-saint from the imperial court, Yi Xian, roared furiously. This person was one of the 10 ominous devils. Because more than 10 of his descendants had been killed by the heavenly lightning and earthly fire, he could not control his anger and roared at Yi Xian. Not only was this quasi-saint angry, but the other quasi-saint ominous devils also looked at Yi Xian unkindly. Even Wu Tian's face was extremely gloomy. He looked at Yi Xian with dissatisfaction. Obviously, Yi Xian had the ability to save these ominous devils, but he just sat there and did nothing. How could Wu Tian and the others not be extremely dissatisfied? Are you lecturing me? Yi Xian looked up at the snake-headed quasi-saint, and a cruel smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Oh no, retreat! Suddenly Wu Tian warned in horror. But what happened next completely stunned all the ominous devils present. Their bodies and minds trembled violently. Rumble! The universe reversed and the void shifted. Yi Xian did not move at all. He only stretched out his palm, and the laws of heaven and earth instantly shattered. A giant palm of dim light fell on the snake-headed quasi-saint's head. Under his horrified gaze, Yi Xian's killing art fell on him. No! Bang! The void shattered and his body exploded. Under the extremely dazzling light, the snake-headed quasi-saint turned into a mist of blood. He was directly killed by Yi Xian. Do you have any objections now? Yi Xian looked at Wu Tian and the others with a smile. His smile was extremely gentle, but in the eyes of Wu Tian and the others, they were extremely horrified. Quasi-saint. The one who died was a quasi-saint. Yi Xian actually killed him just like that without the slightest hesitation. Such cruel and ruthless methods caused Wu Tian and the others to be extremely shocked. However, this was not the reason why Wu Tian and the others were shocked and fearful. The real reason why they were afraid of Yi Xian was that it was not that easy to kill a quasi-saint. Any quasi-saint who stepped into the quasi-saint realm would produce a true spirit. As long as the true spirit was not destroyed, the quasi-saint would not die. But what did they see? Yi Xian killed a quasi-saint with a single blow. Even his true spirit was destroyed in the void. This was simply shocking to the extreme. Chapter 808. The ferocious demons were terrified and speechless. Looking at Yi Xian's sinister and cruel smile, everyone could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. Their hearts were trembling uncontrollably. It was too terrifying. Even though Wu Tian was at the pinnacle of the sage-to-be, he was extremely terrified. He looked at Yi Xian with trembling eyes. Sage-to-be understood sage-to-be, and knew how difficult it was to kill a sage-to-be. Even though he was at the pinnacle of the sage-to-be, he did not dare to say that he could kill a sage-to-be as easily as slaughtering a pig or dog. It was simply wishful thinking. But today Wu Tian's worldview was shattered. He saw with his own eyes that Yi Xian killed a sage-to-be as easily as slaughtering a pig or dog. Moreover, Yi Xian was not a sage-to-be. How could he not be terrified? Master, please calm down. Suddenly Fang Han bowed to Yi Xian. He looked nervous because he realized that Yi Xian was an extremely ruthless person. He did not care about ferocious demons like them at all. Moreover, his cultivation was unimaginably terrifying. Following Fang Han's bow, the other ferocious demons instantly came to their senses. They all knelt and kowtowed to Yi Xian, because they did not want to die. Everyone's eyes were filled with fear. Master, Juyo Tower was built by the two sages of the West. We have been trapped here for countless years, and have no way to escape. Do you have a way to break out of the tower? Wu Tian's eyes moved. He cupped his hands and bowed to Yi Xian. Buzz! His palm pointed to the flowing clouds and the void surged. Yi Xian did not do anything. He just flicked his sleeves and Juyo Tower suddenly shook. Streaks of golden light intertwined all over Juyo Tower. This is the sacred inscription? When the golden light flickered in the void, Wu Tian's eyes suddenly froze. He exclaimed in shock and despair appeared in his eyes. What was the sacred inscription? The saint inscription was a unique technique of a saint, and it was formed by a trace of the saint's saint energy. No matter how powerful one was, no matter how high one's cultivation was, as long as one did not enter the saint realm, no one would be able to escape from the saint inscription. Saint inscriptions filled every corner of Juyo Tower. The golden saint light was too mysterious, and it made one feel as heavy as the heavens. It's over, it's over. Some ferocious demons screamed in despair. For a time, all sorts of discussions were heard, and everyone was filled with despair. They knew very well that with the saint inscriptions in Juyo Tower, they could forget about escaping. Ha! Suddenly, a disdainful sneer sounded. Yi Xian was looking at the saint runes in the air with a strange smile on his face. All Buddhas return to origin. Rumble. Yi Xian formed a seal with both of his hands. He still had a smile on his face, but the light of Buddha around him shone brightly. Mysterious Buddhist runes were shot out by him, and the void in all directions was distorted to the extreme. Phantoms of Buddhas were condensed. Withdraw. All Dharma paths were different and heaven and earth became one. The sound of chanting came from the heavens, causing Juyo Tower to rumble and shake. What happened next stunned Wuxian and the others because they saw an unbelievable scene. The heavens were chanting sutras, the Buddhas were chanting, and the saint inscriptions that filled Juyo Tower were gradually becoming illusory. After a few seconds, they actually collapsed in the void. The saint inscriptions disappeared? Fang Han screamed in horror. He looked at Yi Xian with a complicated look in his eyes. It was as if he couldn't believe that Yi Xian could actually destroy the saint inscriptions. They disappeared, they really disappeared. But how? How could you destroy the means of a saint? If the disappearance of the saint inscriptions meant that Wuxian and the others could escape from Juyo Tower, then Yi Xian's ability to destroy the means of a saint was simply unbelievable to Wuxian. Wuxian had a great background and knew how terrifying a saint was. He had never heard of a sage-to-be being able to destroy the means of a saint. It was simply a fantasy. We're free. Are we really free? Damn the Western religious sect. When I get out, I'll definitely destroy your spiritual mountain. I'll definitely kill this bunch of baldies. The ominous demons roared, and their murderous aura soared into the sky. When these ominous demons saw the saint inscriptions disappear, they roared crazily, constantly venting their depression. Who are you? Suddenly, Wuxian stared at Yi Xian with great fear in his eyes. He didn't believe that Yi Xian was a sage-to-be, because a sage-to-be couldn't possibly destroy the means of the two saints of the West. There was only one real reason. Yi Xian wasn't a sage-to-be, but a real saint. Who are you among the three pure ones? Wuxian roared in horror. His voice instantly suppressed the voices of the ominous demons of heaven and earth. It also made everyone calm down from their excitement. They looked at Yi Xian with extreme nervousness in their eyes. Yi Xian had destroyed the saint inscriptions in Juyo Tower, and destroyed the soul of a sage-to-be with one blow. Just these two things revealed the fact that Yi Xian was a saint. It was no wonder that Wuxian was so nervous. Yi Xian's means were not something a sage-to-be should have. Therefore, Yi Xian must be one of the three pure ones. Only the three pure ones could destroy the saint inscriptions set up by the two saints of the West. The three pure ones? Yi Xian muttered to himself. Then, he looked at Wuxian strangely and said, You really think highly of me. Unfortunately, I'm not one of the three pure ones, nor am I a saint. It's just that you're too inexperienced. Who said that a saint's means can only be broken by another saint? As Yi Xian's words fell, Wuxian was stunned. The ominous demons present were silent and looked at each other. Obviously, they were greatly shocked by Yi Xian's words. Impossible, absolutely impossible. I've never heard of a sage-to-be being able to break a saint's means. This is because the level of life between the two is fundamentally different. This is absolutely impossible. Wuxian kept shaking his head. His eyes were filled with shock and doubt. Obviously, he did not believe that Yi Xian was a sage-to-be. He must be one of the 6 great saints of heaven and earth. Looking at Wuxian's serious face, Yi Xian smiled indifferently. He did not bother to explain to Wuxian. Since Wuxian thought that he was a saint, he would not refuse. In fact, Wuxian was right. Since the creation of the world, saints were high and mighty. Although sage-to-be also had the word saint. Compared to saints, there was a huge difference. However, Wuxian did not know that Yi Xian was now between sage-to-be and saint. If Yi Xian had to be accurately judged, Yi Xian could be called a sage-to-be. This was because when Yi Xian crossed the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao, he had completely surpassed the sage-to-be realm. The so-called sage-to-be could not possibly be his opponent. It was just that there was still a big gap between him and a saint. Moreover, Wuxian had indeed overestimated Yi Xian. Yi Xian could break the sacred runes arranged by the two saints of the West, because he had already mastered the 10,000 Buddha scripture. The 10,000 Buddhist scripture was the most precious treasure of the Western religious sect. It contained all the saints' great arts of the two saints of the West. The sacred runes were one of the saints' great arts of the 10,000 Buddhist scripture. Naturally, Yi Xian could break the sacred runes. Chapter 809. It was also because Yi Xian had easily dissolved the sacred runes that Wu Tian firmly believed that Yi Xian was a saint. However, Yi Xian did not bother to explain it to him. Ah, it hurts. What is this? Suddenly, strands of blood-red light appeared in the air. Before the fiendish devils could react, they had all entered their seas of consciousness, causing them to roll on the ground in pain as they howled miserably. The divine blood thread is also known as the soul annihilation technique. If you work for me loyally, this divine blood thread will naturally not harm you at all. However, if you are disloyal, this divine blood thread will instantly destroy your soul and kill you. Yi Xian lightly smiled, as if he was talking about a very casual matter. However, when the fiendish demons heard this, their expressions couldn't help but change. Because they kept examining themselves, they finally found a blood thread wrapped around their primordial spirits and true spirits. Obviously, Yi Xian had planted the blood god silk in them. From now on, they could only be at the mercy of Yi Xian. Wu Tian greets the Celestial Emperor. Feng Han greets the Celestial Emperor. As the saying goes, a wise man submits to circumstances. Wu Tian and Feng Han looked at each other and hurriedly knelt down towards Yi Xian. It was also their actions that caused the fiendish demons present to chime in one after another. Celestial Emperor, I am willing to be at your beck and call. I dare not have any thoughts of betrayal. Dipankara Buddha bowed deeply to express his loyalty. Looking at the scene before him, Yi Xian smiled happily and said, as long as you are loyal to me, I will naturally let you regain your freedom in the future. Trust. That did not exist. Yi Xian never trusted anyone. He only trusted himself. Moreover, these demons were all arrogant and fierce. Yi Xian never wanted them to be truly loyal to him. As far as Yi Xian was concerned, as long as he controlled their lives and deaths, that was enough. This was because his next plan only required these heaven and earth fiends to listen to his orders. Yi Xian didn't need the so-called loyalty. Leave this place with me. Yi Xian suddenly turned and left. These demons also stood up and quickly followed behind him. Although they had been planted with the blood god silk by Yi Xian and could walk out of Juyo Tower, they were extremely excited because they had been trapped here for too long. Outside Juyo Tower, the four Buddhas had solemn expressions. Duo Bao Rulai was walking anxiously. He kept observing the movements of Juyo Tower, his eyes filled with anxiety. 3,000 Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Arhats, and various Buddhas. They all had an ugly expression, and their eyes were full of great worry. Juyo Tower could only be entered, but not exited. Everyone knew this fact. Anyone who entered Juyo Tower had never truly walked out. The Buddhas of Spirit Mountain did not expect that Yi Xian would dare to enter Juyo Tower alone. This was simply unimaginable. If something really happened to Yi Xian, how were they going to explain it to the two sages of the West? Buddhas, I can only ask you to go to the Western Pure Land to invite the two sect masters. Otherwise, I'm afraid that Qingming Buddha will definitely die in Juyo Tower after a long time. Duo Bao Rulai put his palms together and bowed to the four Buddhas. His tone was slightly anxious. This? Mahavairakana frowned, and hesitation appeared on his face. Rumble. Suddenly, just as the Buddhas of Numinous Mountain were in a state of panic, Juyo Tower rumbled and shook. The black door was slowly opening. This also made Duo Bao Rulai and the others look at Juyo Tower in shock. Roar! The demons roared, and the sky turned dark. Juyo Tower's door finally opened completely. Boundless evil aura rolled out, and extremely terrifying demons roared. We're out! We're finally out! Kill these baldies of Spirit Mountain. Take revenge for being trapped here for so many years. Kill them. The evil aura was boundless, and demonic light rumbled. Countless demons of heaven and earth suddenly appeared outside Juyo Tower. They stared at the Buddhas of Spirit Mountain fiercely. How dare you break out of the tower and come out? The four Buddhas' expressions changed drastically. They chanted the chant of subduing demons, and their auras rose rapidly. The Buddhist light that filled the sky shone down, and their gazes became extremely grave as they looked at these demons of heaven and earth. Set up the formation. Duobao Rilai roared in horror. He flipped his hand and threw out the Buddha's golden alms bowl, directly sealing this part of the world. The bodhisat and arhats behind him instantly set up the Buddhist light formation. They all looked at the demons of heaven and earth who had escaped with horror. Fellow Taoists, you all committed a grave mistake in the past, and that's why you were imprisoned in Juyo Tower. Now that you've escaped, aren't you afraid that the two Western sages will punish you? Although Duobao Rilai's cultivation was only at the peak of the zenith heaven realm, his words carried a lot of weight in Spirit Mountain. Now that the demons of heaven and earth had escaped from Juyo Tower, he braced himself to speak, but his eyes were filled with horror. It was no wonder that Duobao Rilai reacted this way. The ferocious demons of heaven and earth that had escaped from Juyo Tower all had extremely terrifying cultivation levels. The weakest among them was a zenith heaven golden immortal, and the 10 great ferocious demons were releasing sage to be auras. How could he not be terrified? If they really started fighting, Duobao Rilai was very sure that Spirit Mountain would be slaughtered by these demons of heaven and earth in no time. Taoist Duobao. Suddenly a chuckle sounded, and Duobao Rilai looked toward the source of the sound. September Jackdaw? When Duobao Rilai saw Fang Han, his expression changed drastically. He staggered backward, and great fear appeared in his eyes. If I remember correctly, you were a disciple of the Jia sect in the primeval age, and you were fortunate enough to have Tong Tian as your master. I didn't expect that when we met again, you'd already become a disciple of Buddhism, Fang Han said with a cold laugh. You're not dead yet. Duobao Rilai's face was filled with horror. He clearly remembered that when he was still at the Tai realm, Fang Han was already at the zenith heaven realm. If he hadn't been so arrogant and caught the attention of Taoist Juanti, he wouldn't have been suppressed in Juyo Tower for so many years. However, Duobao Rilai didn't expect that not only was Fang Han not dead, but he'd also become a sage to be. Daoyuo Jinxian's Fang Han was extremely terrifying in the past. Now that he'd become a sage to be, his ferocity was probably even greater than before. How could Duobao Rilai not be terrified? Mahavarakana, do you recognize me? Suddenly, Wu Tian strolled out from behind, smiling at Mahavarakana, one of the 4 great Buddhas. This caused Mahavarakana's aura to become chaotic, and the benevolence and peace on his face disappeared. He became livid and solemn. Wu Tian, you're not dead either? Mahavarakana screamed in a trembling voice. He'd fought with Wu Tian for a treasure, but Wu Tian had taken it. This made him hate Wu Tian, and he'd attracted the attention of the 2 saints of the West, which was why he'd suppressed Wu Tian in Juyo Tower. Mahavarakana had thought that Wu Tian had died in Juyo Tower, but he hadn't expected him to still be alive after so many years. As the saying goes, when enemies meet, their eyes turn red. Mahavarakana knew that Wu Tian would never let him go. The world was silent, and there was no sound. A strong smell of gunpowder filled the air, as if the Buddhas of Spirit Mountain and the demons of heaven and earth were about to start a war. Amipa. Suddenly, an ancient Buddhist chant rang out in the air, breaking the silence of the place. The expressions of the ferocious demons changed slightly, and they all consciously opened up a path. A figure covered in Buddhist light strolled over at that moment. Qingming Buddha? Duobao Rilai and the 4 great Buddhas cried out in shock when they saw the person who'd appeared. The Buddhas of Spirit Mountain were even more shocked, and the Buddhist light around them was extremely chaotic. Greetings, Buddha. Something strange happened that frightened the Buddhas of Spirit Mountain even more. The demons of heaven and earth, who were originally arrogant and fierce, prostrated themselves before Yi Xian in the void, their faces full of reverence. Chapter 8:10. What's going on? Duobao Rilai exclaimed in surprise. The scene in front of him made him feel like he had fallen into a dream. He couldn't imagine that the ferocious demons of heaven and earth, who were so arrogant just a moment ago, were now bowing down to Yi Xian. Amipa. A ring of Buddhist light rippled through the heavens and earth. illuminating Yi Xian to the point of being boundlessly imposing. As he chanted the name of Buddha, his face revealed a merciful expression. This also caused the Buddhas of Spirit Mountain to quickly wake up from their daze. Greetings, Buddha Qing Ming. The 4 Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Buddhas, and even the monks of Spirited Mountain, all put their palms together and bowed to Yi Xian. However, everyone's eyes were filled with surprise. They didn't know what relationship these ferocious demons of heaven and earth had with Yi Xian. The Buddhas of Spirited Mountain were not stupid. When these ferocious demons of heaven and earth kowtowed to Yi Xian, it was obvious that there was an unusual relationship between the two. They were also waiting for Yi Xian's answer. The sea of bitterness is boundless. Repent and you'll see the shore. Lay down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha immediately. Yi Xian smiled peacefully and said, Buddhism is vast and all living beings are saved. I entered Jiyo Tower and received the heart of Buddha. Du Wutian and the others were freed from the sea of bitterness. From now on, there will be no more so-called ferocious demons of heaven and earth. They will all be devoted to Buddhism and become members of Spirited Mountain. What? No. Buddha. When Yi Xian finished speaking, there was an uproar. The Buddhas of Spirited Mountain who were present changed their expressions. Their eyes were filled with horror, and they even tried to dissuade him. It was no wonder that the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain were terrified. It was already a big deal that the ferocious demons of heaven and earth had escaped from Jiyo Tower. If they all joined Buddhism, wouldn't Spirited Mountain become a place to hide evil? Amitabha. Yi Xian chanted the name of Buddha, and an extremely terrifying Buddha's aura spread out. Instantly, the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain fell silent. They all looked at Yi Xian with a heavy expression. The Buddhist sect is vast, and we help people to do good. Since they have repented, the Buddhist sect is naturally willing to accept them. This matter is settled. All of you may leave. Yi Xian acted arbitrarily, and even displayed the vast power of Buddha. His face also showed the appearance of an angry Vajra, not allowing the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain to object at all. Yes, Buddha. Duo Bao Rilai's expression changed slightly. His eyes turned slightly as he quickly bowed to Yi Xian. He then called for all the Bodhisattvas and Buddhas to return to their respective dojos. However, Duo Bao Rilai's eyes were extremely horrified. It was obvious that he had some unknown thoughts in his mind. Buddha Qing Ming's Dharma is boundless. We are ashamed of our inferiority. The 4 Buddhas put their palms together and bowed to Yi Xian. Then, a cloud rose under their feet and floated away. No one knew what the 4 Buddhas were thinking. Go! Looking at all the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain leaving, Yi Xian spoke softly and strolled towards the Tempest Temple in the void. Wu Tian and the other fierce demons quickly followed behind him, and all of them disappeared into the void. Rumble! When Yi Xian and the others left, the towering Jiyo Tower collapsed with a loud bang. Its former glory no longer existed, and only debris was left on the ground, proving that Jiyo Tower had once existed in this world. Tempest Temple. The murderous aura was boundless, and the light of Buddha lingered. The 2 extreme auras intertwined, causing the entire Tempest Temple to become extremely strange. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the golden lotus of Buddha. The light of Buddha on his body was auspicious and heavy. All around him were the fierce demons of heaven and earth, who had escaped from Jiyo Tower. Buddha, may I know why you want us to join Spirited Mountain? Wu Tian was the first to speak. His eyes were filled with doubt. One had to know that they were all vicious demons. Yet Yi Xian actually allowed them to stay in the Spirit Mountain. If word of this were to spread, it would definitely attract the attention of the 3 realms. Furthermore, Wu Tian and the others knew that Yi Xian's identity could not be exposed. If they did so, it was very likely that they would expose Yi Xian's identity. Prosper Buddhism and destroy Tao. Suddenly Yi Xian softly said. Just these 4 simple words instantly caused the surrounding fiendish demons to suck in a breath of cold air. Their gazes towards Yi Xian were filled with extreme shock. Prosper Buddhism and destroy Tao. Feng Han murmured to himself. Then, he looked at Yi Xian with trembling eyes and said, I wonder if my lord can explain what it means to prosper Buddhism and destroy Tao. Among the 4 major states, Tao is flourishing. Even in the Aparagodania continent, there are many Tao branches. The two sages of the West have always wanted Buddhism to flourish. Since that is the case, I will fulfill their wish. Yi Xian smiled. However, his smile was strange and sinister, giving people an extremely creepy feeling. My lord, you want to provoke a war between Buddhism and Tao? Wu Tian's expression changed greatly, and his voice trembled. The Great Witch Demon Calamity, the war between Buddhism and Tao. This is a brilliant age, but it is also a cruel world. If I don't stir up chaos in the three realms, how can I fish in troubled waters and enter the Saint Plain? Yi Xian murmured to himself. The smile on his face became even stranger. Hiss! Hearing Yi Xian's words, the ferocious demons sucked in a breath of cold air. Their gazes towards Yi Xian were filled with extreme fear. They never thought that Yi Xian would actually want to cause complete chaos in the three realms. What is the great catastrophe of heaven and earth? What is the dark turmoil? Let it all begin at Spirited Mountain. Yi Xian murmured to himself with a smile, as if he was talking about something very calm. However, his eyes were sinister and strange, and contained an unknown excitement. The shocking battle between the two celestial court had indeed brought a catastrophe to the three realms. However, this was nothing to Yi Xian. Since there was going to be chaos, then let it be chaos. He wanted to be the initiator of this dark turmoil, and completely ignite all the hatred and anger in the three realms. Only then could he quietly become a saint in this chaotic world. The Great Witch Demon Calamity and the war between Buddhism and Tao had always been two major hidden dangers since the Untainted Age. They would also involve the 6 sages of heaven and earth. Only then could he have enough time to quickly become a saint. After passing the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao, Yi Xian would be invincible among the sage-to-be. However, Yi Xian had no idea what the second tribulation of the heavenly Tao was. As the saying went, victory in chaos. If the three realms were in chaos, perhaps the second tribulation of the heavenly Tao would come quickly. Only after Yi Xian passed the 3 tribulations of the heavenly Tao would he have the ability to fight against the sages. My lord, I have something to say, but I don't know if I should say it. Fang Han cupped his hands and said to Yi Xian, Say it. We have been imprisoned in Juyo Tower for countless years. The Buddhas of Spirited Mountain see us as enemies. Although my lord has suppressed them, I'm afraid that they will be disloyal. If the 2 sages of the West know about this, I'm afraid. Fang Han stopped speaking. However, he did not need to continue. Yi Xian understood what he meant. You're right. I have my ways. Yi Xian smiled with a strange look in his eyes. How could he not know that he had caused such a big commotion? How could the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain remain indifferent? Clang, clang, clang. Auspicious and colorful, the light of Buddha covered the sky. 81 bells were rung in Spirited Mountain. The light of Buddha shone brightly, and the Tempest Temple that stood tall even emitted endless light of Buddha. Chapter 8:11. All the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain were rushing towards the Tempest Temple. When the 81 bells were rung in Spirited Mountain, it meant that something big was about to happen. Hence, they did not dare to delay, and rushed towards the Tempest Temple. In the Tempest Temple, the demons of heaven and earth sat cross-legged in the void. However, the ferocious aura on their bodies had disappeared. Instead, their bodies were blooming with auspicious light of Buddha, and they were wearing the unique robes of Buddhism. Those who did not know the identities of these demons would definitely think that they were the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain. Yi Xian wore a white robe and sat cross-legged on the golden lotus of Buddha. A light of Buddha rose behind him, and he was chanting the Diamond Sutra in his hand. Whoosh whoosh, whoosh whoosh. Mahavarakana was the leader of the 4 great Buddhas. When he saw the fiendish demons sitting cross-legged beside Yi Xian, their bodies were surrounded by Buddhist light. They no longer had the fiendish aura from before, and an extremely bad feeling arose in their hearts. Whoosh! What? The smile on Mahavarakana's face disappeared as he let out a low roar. The Buddhist light around him was extremely turbulent, and he looked at Yi Xian with a look of horror. Not only Mahavarakana, but the 3 great Buddhas also had gloomy expressions. The rest of the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain were in an uproar, and instantly, the great Thunderclap Monastery became extremely noisy. Duo Bao Rulai, on the other hand, was looking down and not moving. However, no one noticed Duobao Rilai's abnormality. Noisy. Suddenly Wuxian roared, instantly suppressing the voices of the Buddhas on Spirit Mountain. An extremely terrifying might pressed on the minds of the Buddhas on Spirit Mountain, causing their voices to abruptly come to a halt. Buddha Qingming is the master of Spirited Mountain. How dare you question his decision? Wuxian scolded coldly. How dare you, demon? You have just entered Spirited Mountain. Is this the place for you to speak? A Buddha retorted with a low roar. He would never allow Wuxian to behave atrociously in the Great Thunderclap Monastery. Buddha Qingming is wise. The Tao lineage was founded by the three pure ones. If we wipe out all the Tao lineages in the Aparagodania continent, wouldn't we be provoking a war between Buddhism and Taoism? Even if you have the heart to promote Buddhism, this method is not advisable. Buddha, please think twice before you act, Mahavarakana said coldly. That's right. Since ancient times, Buddhism and Taoism have been one. If Spirited Mountain were to attack Tao, even the two sect leaders would never allow it, another Buddha echoed. Are you defying my will? Suddenly, the peaceful smile on Yixian's face disappeared, and the surrounding Buddhist light dissipated with a loud bang. Waves of terrifying chaotic fog covered him, and how could he still have the slightest bit of Buddhist peace? You've actually become a demon? Looking at the demonic aura that bloomed around Yixian, Mahavarakana roared in horror. His expression instantly became vigilant, and a great sense of fear grew in his heart. How dare you, Qingming? I've long seen that something is wrong. You dare to wallow in the mire with these demons of heaven and earth. We will definitely report today's matter to the two sect leaders. A Buddha reprimanded. Let's go. Mahavarakana chanted the name of Buddha, and a bright Buddhist light erupted. He directly called for the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain to leave the Tempest Temple. Obviously, the situation at this time was extremely dangerous, and the best solution was to leave this place and report this matter to the two sages of the West. Do you think you can leave? Rumble. The Buddhist light dissipated, and the demonic aura was boundless. Led by Wuxian and Fang Han, the two of them led many demons of heaven and earth to surround the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain. It was also at this moment that the void of the Great Thunderclap Temple was trapped, and the surroundings were covered by the chaotic fog. An extremely terrifying aura filled every corner of the Great Thunderclap Temple, making it impossible for the Buddhas on Spirited Mountain to escape. Qingming, what are you trying to do? Aren't you afraid that the two sect leaders will find out about today's matter and punish you? Mahavarakana roared in a trembling voice, and his eyes were extremely heavy. He knew that if he made a mistake today, he would be consigned to eternal damnation. What am I trying to do? Yixian smiled, but his smile was very strange. It made the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain feel a sense of trepidation, as if Yixian's smile was more terrifying than death. Zhuanti has a sage's method, and this method is called the Soul Expiation Buddhist Voice. This method can expiate all living things. Unfortunately, this method is not recorded in the Thousand Buddha scripture, and it's a pity that these two bald thieves don't know. When they used the Soul Expiation Buddhist Voice on me, I happened to remember this method. Today, I will use this opportunity to expiate all of you here. Yixian rose from the golden lotus of Buddha, and the fog around him covered the sky and the earth. An extremely demonic and terrifying aura surrounded Yixian, and the mysterious chanting of sutras came from the void of the heavens. Buddha becomes a demon. Suddenly, Yixian roared ferociously, and an extremely cruel and violent expression appeared on his face. He put his palms together like a demon monk, and his mouth was chanting an extremely mysterious and abstruse sutra. Although the Soul Expiation Buddhist Voice was a unique method of the two sages of the West, and it seemed to be a great Buddhist skill, it was actually just a method to use it. Yixian was extremely enthusiastic about this method, and he had made great improvements based on the general principles of the Immortal scripture. He had already changed the Soul Expiation Buddhist Voice to an extremely terrifying level. At this moment, Yixian was using the Soul Expiation Buddhist Voice, or rather, he was using the Soul Expiation Demonic Voice, because he wanted to expiate all the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain. From then on, they would be loyal to him, and the entire spirited mountain would be used by him. Ah, no. What's this? The chanting of sutras in the heavens and the demonic voice poured into their ears. Yi Xian's chanting became louder and louder, and the entire Tempest Temple turned into a dark prison. Black demonic lotuses grew in the void, and they turned into a raging demonic fire that drowned all the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain. The Buddhas were howling miserably, and the Bodhisattvas were screaming. This was an expiation of demons, and it was a tragic process of Buddhas turning into demons. Not only did it change the temperament of all the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain, but it also gradually made them blindly trust and acknowledge Yi Xian. Said Duobao Rilai had said had it. Buzz! A strand of blood god thread appeared in Yi Xian's hand. He raised his hand and put it between Duobao Rilai's eyebrows. Duobao Rilai did not dare resist because he knew that if he wanted to live, he had to be controlled by Yi Xian. This was the only way he could survive. Heavenly Emperor, I have been disrespectful to you in the past. I hope you can forgive me. From now on, I will be at your beck and call. I will not dare to betray you. Duobao Rilai kowtowed humbly to show his attitude. You are not bad. Yi Xian smiled. He liked smart people, and Duobao Rilai was a smart person, although they had been enemies for a long time, and Yi Xian had wanted to kill him. Yi Xian's cultivation had left Duobao Rilai far behind. Naturally, he would not treat him as an opponent. Of course, Yi Xian was not a benevolent person. He was not that broad-minded. He could kill Duobao Rilai if he wanted to, but killing him would not be of much use to Yi Xian. At this moment, Duobao Rilai belonged to him. This was the best result. On this day, the great thunderclap temple of Spirit Mountain was filled with Buddhist light. The sound of Buddhist chanting could be heard. The bell of Spirit Mountain kept ringing, echoing in the Aparagodania continent. On this day, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the great thunderclap temple of Spirit Mountain all walked out of Spirit Mountain. They roamed the Aparagodania continent with angry Vajradharma images. They eradicated any orthodoxy that did not respect the Western sect. Orthodoxy of Chan sect kill. Orthodoxy of Jie sect kill. Even the demon kings who were cultivating in seclusion deep in the mountains, and the orthodoxies that the imperial court of the mortal world believed in. Those who did not respect the Buddhist orthodoxy were all reduced to heresy. The Buddhas all over the sky started a boundless massacre, constantly establishing the prestige of Buddhism in the Aparagodania continent. Such a huge commotion in Spirit Mountain of the West naturally attracted the attention of various orthodoxies. If it was in the past, it would definitely be a shocking event. However, because of the battle between the two celestial courts, the three realms of heaven, earth, and man had been in turmoil. The Buddhist sect purged the orthodoxies of the collateral orthodoxies, so naturally, it did not cause much of a stir. However, a single spark could start a prairie fire. This was only Yi Xian's first step. No one would have thought that the real catastrophe of heaven and earth had just begun. Ever since the battle between the two celestial courts that broke through the heaven and earth realms, the ancient demon court was in a state of semi-seclusion. They even gathered all their forces to recuperate. The two demon emperors even went into seclusion, and the so-called orthodoxy of heaven and earth was reduced to a joke. The battle in the past was too terrifying. It also completely established Yi Xian's glorious reputation. The two demon emperors were suppressed. Even with the support of Saint Nuwa, no orthodoxy in the three realms would submit to the ancient demon court. The ancient demon court's reputation was tarnished. The massive heavenly cycle star formation was broken. The two demon emperors were trampled under Yi Xian's feet. More than half of the ancient demons were killed. This was an extremely heavy blow to the ancient demon court. Back to the 33-layered celestial court led by Yi Xian. Ever since Yi Xian was taken away by the two sages of the West, the 33-layered celestial court vanished. The Great Celestial Protection Formation covered the 33-layered celestial court. No one knew where it was hidden in this world. All information about Yi Xian and the celestial court seemed to have disappeared from the world. No one knew what happened to Yi Xian, and no one knew where the 33-layered celestial court was. Everything about Yi Xian disappeared from the three realms. The most shocking thing was that Nuwa and Yuanshi jointly issued a saint's decree, announcing to the people of the three realms that Yi Xian was a ferocious demon of heaven and earth. Anyone related to him was an evil demon, and all of them would be wiped out from the world. Fortunately, the Jie lineage had Tong Tian. Yuanshi and Nuwa did not dare to be too presumptuous. After all, the four immortal slaying swords were not just for show. Tong Tian was also sitting cross-legged outside the 33-layered heaven. If Yuanshi and Nuwa did anything strange, he would definitely appear again. Moreover, Tong Tian had always felt that he had let Yi Xian down. He was one of the three pure ones, and he controlled the immortal slaying sword formation. Yet, he was unable to protect Yi Xian. This was a great humiliation for Tong Tian. Not only did he bear a grudge against Nuwa and Yuanshi, the two sages of the West had also become a thorn in his heart. He wished he could skin the four sages alive. Chapter 813. Spirit Mountain Great Lane Temple. Yi Xian was dressed in a white monk robe. He was still disguised as Qingming Buddha, because this was his current identity. Wu Tian and the others stood behind him, accompanied by Duo Bao Rilai and Dai Pamkara. Master, are you really leaving? Wu Tian asked in a low voice. You're at the peak of the sage-to-be. With you guarding Spirit Mountain, you can easily resist as long as the saints don't come out. I'm not needed here anymore, Yi Xian said calmly. Master, your identity can't be exposed. If you appear in the three realms alone, I'm afraid. Duo Bao Rilai said worriedly, his eyes trembling slightly. Obviously, Yi Xian had offended the two saints. Duo Bao Rilai was very confused about the relationship between Yi Xian and the two saints of the West. Everything seemed to be a cloud of fog that he couldn't see or guess clearly. You must do what I tell you. You don't have to worry about anything else, Yi Xian said calmly, his eyes unfathomable. Because he had to leave, controlling Spirit Mountain of the West was only his first step. It was only one of his methods to stir up chaos in the world. Yi Xian understood one thing very well. To forge iron, one had to be strong. The so-called methods were only temporary. He had to rely on himself to make himself stronger. Only when he was strong could he suppress the world. At that time, he wouldn't need these useless methods. He could crush all his enemies. Even the saints would be trampled under his feet. Yi Xian wanted to find his second tribulation of the heavenly Tao. Only after passing the three tribulations of the heavenly Tao could he be fearless of the saints. This was what he really needed. Moreover, he was pressed for time. Although he had deceived the two saints of the West and lured out Yuan Ling, paper couldn't wrap fire. Sooner or later, his true identity would be exposed. Moreover, the two saints of the West and Yuan Ling would realize that he hadn't been converted at all. Yi Xian had to achieve supreme cultivation before he was discovered. Only then would he truly have no fear of the six great saints of the heavens and earth. He would also have a bargaining chip to compete with them, and even truly face Yuan Ling. If he stayed on Spirit Mountain, it would only waste Yi Xian's time. So he had to leave. Moreover, he had already thought of where to find the second tribulation of the heavenly axiom. Farewell, Master. Wu Tian and the others bowed to Yi Xian. Duo Bao Rilai and Burning Lamp did not dare be slow because their lives were in Yi Xian's hands. If Yi Xian died, none of them would live. Qi. Yi Xian stepped into the sky, and a cloud appeared under his feet, carrying him towards the east. In a flash, he disappeared from the eyes of Wu Tian and the others. In the cave of the slanting moon and 3 stars on Mount Lingtai Fengsuan, the heavens and earth were boundless, and the universe was always changing. The Mount Lingtai Fengsuan had always been the pure land of the 3 realms, since the creation of the heavens and earth. It had never been disturbed by anyone. Pan Gu opened the sky, Hongjun preached the Tao, sages appeared, and all things were born. The river of time flowed slowly according to the unchanging law. Everyone's fate was determined by the heavens. Whether it was the 6 great saints of the heavens, or the living beings of the 3 realms, their fate had long been determined under the heavenly axiom, and could not be changed. There were many who shouted this slogan, "My fate is in my own hands, not the heavens." However, there were very few who could really do it. Although there were few, it did not mean that there were no such people in the three realms. All living beings who were not born by the heavens and earth had a glimmer of hope to not be controlled by the heavenly axiom. Landia, Zhenyuanzi, Donghuangtai, Dijun, demon ancestor Luo Ho, and the extremely mysterious patriarch Sabodi. Their origins were extremely mysterious. Some were born from the primal chaos, and demon ancestor Luo Ho was one of the chaos demon gods. Naturally, they were not under the jurisdiction of the heavenly axiom. Therefore, the three realms was not as simple as one imagined. It was filled with too many secrets that were not known by anyone. Yi Xian was dressed in a white monk robe. He strolled among the green mountains and clear waters. With every step he took, he crossed a distance of 10,000 miles. A mountain range in front of him faintly appeared in his eyes. Buzz! The void changed as lotuses bloomed with every step. The Buddhist light that filled the sky surged in the void. Golden lotuses bloomed in all directions. All living things were recovering. Vegetation was growing. The lush vegetation was growing at a speed visible to the naked eye. So near, yet worlds apart. When Yi Xian appeared at the foot of Mount Fangsuan, he saw a scene that left him astonished. Wheat fields were as dazzling as a golden sea. Large numbers of farmers were plowing the fields, and the hoes in their hands were constantly plowing the soil. It was as though they were immersed in the joy of farming, even though Yi Xian's entire body was emitting a peaceful Buddhist light, making him look incomparably imposing. These farmers only raised their heads to glance at him, before continuing to farm the fields beneath their feet. Interesting. Yi Xian's Dharma eyes Tongtian could tell at a glance that the farmers were mortals. However, they did not show any surprise when they saw him. Instead, they had a tranquil look in their eyes. This made Yi Xian filled with curiosity towards Mount Fangsuan. Immortal Elder, are you here to seek immortality? A middle-aged man in a sweatshirt and carrying a hoe walked towards Yi Xian. Although he was only immortal, his body was strong, and he had a vitality that ordinary people did not have. He smiled and greeted Yi Xian. I heard that there is a patriarch Sabodi on Mount Fangsuan. His magical power is boundless, and I have long admired him. I specially came here to pay a visit. Yi Xian put his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. As expected, the middle-aged farmer laughed and said, "Every year, there are people who find this place and want to become Patriarch Sabodi's disciple. However, he only accepts fated people. If Immortal Elder can find the cave of the slanting moon and 3 stars, you will naturally be able to meet him." As the middle-aged farmer spoke, he pointed the way up the mountain for Yi Xian. Then, he waved at Yi Xian and went back to plowing the fields. Following the direction pointed by the middle-aged farmer, Yi Xian saw a small path up the mountain. He strolled towards it. Mount Fangsuan wasn't tall. It looked like an ordinary mountain, and it didn't have the slightest bit of concealment. When Yi Xian stepped onto the mountain path, his entire body disappeared from Mount Fangsuan. Inside Mount Fangsuan, Yi Xian walked along the small path up the mountain. The surrounding vegetation grew vigorously. Time passed by slowly. After 2 hours, Yi Xian still did not see the end of the path. Suddenly Yi Xian stopped. His eyes flashed with a strange black light. His eyes seemed to be able to see through the 3 realms of heaven, earth and man. He felt that there was something wrong with Mount Fangsuan. According to his speed, he would be able to reach the summit in at most the time it would take to brew a cup of tea. However, after a full 2 hours he was still walking on the mountain path. If there wasn't any mystery behind this, Yi Xian wouldn't believe it. Yi Xian abruptly turned his head around, and his eyes instantly froze. A trace of gloominess flashed through his eyes, because he actually saw that he was still at the foot of the mountain. This 2-hour journey didn't allow him to advance at all. Summer of heaven and earth, 10,000 arch traceless? Yi Xian muttered to himself. A look of shock flashed across his face. Chapter 8:14. What a good ancestral master Subhuti. Just this one ability is already inferior to me. It seems that I've underestimated you. Yi Xian looked around as a loud rumbling sound came from his mouth. However, no one responded to him. Unknowingly, Yi Xian had fallen into Patriarch Sabodi's secret art. It took him 2 hours to realize the mystery behind it, which made Yi Xian cautious. Void of all laws, return to the origin. Rumble. Thunderclouds surged and thunder rumbled. Yi Xian waved his hand and directly shot out a great technique from the undying immortal scripture, pressing it forward with a loud bang. Crack! The sound of jade shattering could be heard. The void in front of Yi Xian cracked like a mirror. With a loud bang, the world suddenly changed and became very different from before. A mottled stone tablet and a white jade palace gate appeared. The stone tablet was ancient and inscribed with the mottled traces of time. There were also a few words written on it. Cave of the Slanting Moon and 3 Stars. Breaking through the illusions and seeing the essence, Yi Xian stood in front of the Cave of the Slanting Moon and 3 Stars. His eyes narrowed as he stared at the white palace gate in front of him. He didn't speak or move, as if he was waiting for something. Senior Immortal, please go back. Patriarch doesn't want to see you. The white jade palace gate slowly opened, and a Taoist child walked out. He first bowed to Yi Xian, and then spoke softly. Patriarch Saboti doesn't appear in the 3 realms. He's indestructible and lives forever with the world. Today, this little monk has come to pay a visit. I hope Patriarch Saboti can meet me. Yi Xian put his palms together and chanted Buddha's name in a low voice. You don't believe in Buddhism. Even if you wear a monk's robe, it won't change your nature. You'd better go back to where you came from. The dispute of the 3 realms has nothing to do with me, and I don't want to be involved. An ancient voice came from inside the Cave of the Slanting Moon and 3 Stars. Obviously, the owner of this voice was Patriarch Saboti, who was ordering Yi Xian to leave. You know who I am? Yi Xian was slightly taken aback. He believed that his disguise would not reveal his true identity, but from Patriarch Saboti's words, it seemed that the other party knew that he was not a Buddhist. I don't know. Although you are shrouded in the light of Buddha, and appear to be benevolent and peaceful, the birds in my mountain are all intelligent. Since you entered the mountain, they have all left the forest one after another. This shows that you have no Buddha in your heart, let alone benevolence. Otherwise, why would these birds be afraid of you? Patriarch Saboti's calm voice came from the Cave of the Slanting Moon and 3 Stars. So that's how it is. Yi Xian nodded with a self-deprecating smile on his face. It seemed that he had been too confident and had exposed some flaws in certain details. Since you know that I'm not a Buddhist, you should also know that I won't leave. Yi Xian strolled forward and was about to enter the Cave of the Slanting Moon and 3 Stars. How dare you? Seeing that Yi Xian was about to force his way into the Cave of the Slanting Moon and 3 Stars, the Taoist boy rebuked and was about to hit Yi Xian with his horsetail whisk. But before he could do anything, Patriarch Saboti's voice came from the Cave of the Slanting Moon and 3 Stars. Boy, step back. Let him in. Patriarch, you? The Taoist boy's expression changed slightly, but he still stepped aside and looked at Yi Xian with an unfriendly gaze. Yi Xian ignored the Taoist boy and walked directly into the Cave of the Slanting Moon and 3 Stars. As the white palace door slowly closed, Yi Xian also disappeared from the outside world. Cave of the Slanting Moon and 3 Stars. Flowers, birds, fishes, and insects were engraved on the quaint stone walls. Green cypresses were rooted in the soil, and an extremely rich spiritual energy rippled in this space. There was even a faint mysterious chanting sound coming from it. Yi Xian strolled forward until he came to the end of the path. A lotus platform floated in the void, with a white-robed old man sitting cross-legged on it. Although there was no aura around him, he gave off a sense of tranquility and peace. Greetings, Patriarch Saboti. Yi Xian cupped his hands and bowed. He came here not only to ask for Patriarch Saboti's help, but also because Saboti was Sun Wukong's master. No matter how one looked at it, he had to show enough respect. Young friend, your cultivation is profound and can be said to be at the peak of the 3 realms. If there are no saints, you should be the ruler of this world. Patriarch Saboti had white hair and a youthful complexion. His 3-feet-long white beard swayed in the breeze. There was a kind smile on his face as he spoke softly to Yi Xian. In the face of Patriarch Saboti's praise, Yi Xian didn't show any complacency. This was because he could feel that Patriarch Saboti's cultivation was not below his. Although he was not a saint, the other party always gave him a sense of vigilance. Yi Xian trusted his intuition very much. If a person could make him feel threatened, that person was definitely not simple. Yuan Ling was the same, and so was Patriarch Sabodi in front of him. Patriarch Sabodi is overpraising me, Yi Xian said with a faint smile. If I'm not mistaken, you are the brother of my disciple Sun Wukong, right? Patriarch Sabodi said with a gentle smile. Hearing Patriarch Sabodi's words, Yi Xian was startled. After 3 breaths of time, he smiled and the Buddhist light around him slowly dissipated, revealing his original appearance. Patriarch Sabodi is very capable. I didn't expect that you could see through my true form. Yi Xian changed back to his original appearance and cupped his hands towards Patriarch Sabodi. Little friend, your divine ability is amazing. Even I can't see through your true form. However, this old man is proficient in some of the principles of heaven and earth. I also know that there are very few people in the 3 realms who can have a cultivation like yours. Yi Tiandi's name has spread throughout the 3 realms. Apart from you, who else would come to visit this old man? Patriarch Sabodi let out a long sigh. He looked deeply at Yi Xian and said, this old man didn't expect that little friend would be able to escape from the 2 saints of the West. It seems that you are indeed the chosen one. I once heard from brother Sun Wukong that Patriarch is erudite and knowledgeable. Not only do you have great divine ability, but you also have great wisdom. Today, I came here to consult you about a few things. Yi Xian's eyes narrowed slightly as he solemnly bowed to Patriarch Sabodi. Little friend, please speak. Patriarch Sabodi frowned slightly. A trace of embarrassment flashed through his eyes. However, when he saw Yi Xian's solemn expression, he knew that even if he refused Yi Xian, he would not leave. First, who is Yuan Ling? Second, is he the one who created the immortal scripture? Third, I walk the path of Tao affirmation through strength. I have already passed the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao. What are the next 8 tribulations? Yi Xian didn't hide anything and directly spoke of the greatest doubt in his heart. This was also the thing he wanted to know the most, because he found out from Sun Wukong that these 3 questions might only be answered by Patriarch Sabodi. This was also his true purpose for coming here. Silence, silence, extreme silence. When Yi Xian asked these 3 questions, Patriarch Sabodi became silent. He didn't answer Yi Xian for a long time. Yi Xian looked straight at Patriarch Sabodi. He believed that Patriarch Sabodi would give him the answers he wanted. A trace of regret and pity appeared in his eyes. Although this emotion of Patriarch Sabodi disappeared in a flash, it was still captured by Yi Xian. May I know why Patriarch sighed? Yi Xian asked in a low voice. Sigh. Patriarch Sabodi let out a long sigh, then looked at Yi Xian and said, you seem to have embarked on the way of proving Tao through strength, but in the end, you only made a wedding dress for someone else. This old man only regrets that you will end up with your soul scattered on this path. Yuan Ling? Yi Xian laughed self-deprecatingly, already guessing the meaning behind Patriarch Sabodi's words. At the beginning of the Yuan, all living things are spirits. The title Yuan Ling is just his delusion, and you can achieve what you have today because of him. Without Yuan Ling, there would be no Yi Xian. Therefore, you owe him karma from beginning to end, and this karma is so great that you will have to repay it with your life. Patriarch Sabodi sighed. Upon hearing Patriarch Sabodi's words, Yi Xian fell silent. At his current level, even if Patriarch Sabodi did not say anything, he could already feel the karma between him and Yuan Ling. Yi Xian knew very well that if Yuan Ling had not appeared in his youth, he would have turned into a pile of bones long ago. Yuan Ling had completely changed him during the 4 years of the Blood Sea battlefield. It could be said that his cultivation was bestowed upon him by Yuan Ling. This was the so-called cycle of karma. Whether it was a favor or a calamity, he had to repay it. This was the destiny of karma. Even if he became the saint of saints, he could not escape the power of karma, because this was the truth of the universe. Tell me, who is Yuan Ling's real body? Yi Xian asked solemnly, looking straight at Patriarch Sabodi. This was also the question he wanted to know the most. He came from the chaos, and came here in search of immortality. I don't know who he is, but his shadow has been behind every great calamity since the beginning of time. Patriarch Subhuti let out a long sigh. I find it strange. Even the saints don't know about his existence. Why do you know about it, Patriarch? I'm afraid it's not that simple, is it? Yi Xian said sharply. When the chaos was born, I was a Bodhi tree in the chaos. Although I was ignorant at that time, I still had some memories of the chaos. Yuan Ling has existed longer than the great god Pangu. He was originally a character from the chaos. If you really want to know his identity, perhaps the only way is to reverse time and space and find his real body before the heaven and earth were created. Patriarch Subhuti laughed self-deprecatingly. After hearing Patriarch Subhuti's words, Yi Xian pondered on the spot. Yuan Ling became more and more mysterious in his heart. An old monster who had lived longer than the great god Pangu was too terrifying. Young friend, if you listen to my advice and want to break free from this person's control, then cripple the undying immortal scripture you cultivate and sever all your karma with him. Only in this way can you break free from his hands. Otherwise, even if you can become a saint in the future, at that time, he will definitely ask you for your karma. In the end, you will only be paving the way for him. Patriarch Subhuti solemnly advised Yi Xian, because this was the only way Yi Xian could get rid of Yuan Ling, abolish the immortal scripture, become immortal, and walk the path of cultivation again. Yi Xian murmured to himself, a self-deprecating smile appearing on his face. Impossible. Suddenly, Yi Xian's expression turned gloomy as he spoke in a powerful voice. If it was when he had just become an immortal, Yi Xian might have accepted Patriarch Subhuti's suggestion. However, now that he had reached this point, it could be said that he was treading on thin ice and was in danger of dying at any time. If he were to cripple the immortal scripture now, not to mention walking on the path of cultivation, it wouldn't be long before he would die between heaven and earth. Nuwa and Yuanshi wanted to kill him. The two sages of the West were plotting against him, and the members of the 33rd Celestial Court were waiting for his return. Moreover, there were the enmity of various orthodoxies against him. If he were to lose his cultivation, how would he face all these things? Little friend, take care of yourself. This is all this old man has to say. Patriarch Subhuti shook his head in disappointment. Since Yi Xian was unwilling to abolish the immortal scripture, it meant that he would not have a good ending in the future. No matter how much he tried to persuade him, it would be useless. Chapter 8:16. Thank you for your advice, Patriarch. Yi Xian will remember your kindness today. Although Yi Xian didn't know who Yuan Ling's real identity was, he wasn't disappointed. After all, Yuan Ling had hidden himself so deeply. It would be strange if Patriarch Subhuti knew his identity. However, Yi Xian's trip today was not in vain. After all, he now knew what the 9 tribulations of the heavenly Tao were, which would be of great benefit to him in the future. May I know where Brother Wukong is now? Yi Xian cupped his hands and bowed to Patriarch Subhuti. Since he had come to Fengsun Mountain, Sun Wukong must also be here. How could he not see him? Sun Wukong, he sighed. Patriarch Subhuti's expression changed slightly. A complicated look flashed in his eyes. He took a deep look at Yi Xian as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. Looking at Patriarch Subhuti's hesitant look, Yi Xian's heart skipped a beat. Did something happen to Brother Wukong? In fact, Yi Xian had been vaguely worried about Sun Wukong. Sun Wukong didn't appear during the battle between the 2 celestial court. This was definitely not his character. If Sun Wukong knew that he was in trouble, he would appear by his side, even if they were separated by millions of miles. However, Sun Wukong didn't appear back then. Sigh! Patriarch Subhuti stood up from the lotus platform, a helpless aura around him. He looked up at the sky and sighed. My disciple knew about the battle between you and the ancient celestial court, and was about to go. This old man didn't want him to be involved in this worldly dispute, so he was detained in Fengsun Mountain. Yi Xian frowned slightly. If that was all, it would be reasonable. However, Yi Xian could feel that Patriarch Subhuti wasn't sad because of this matter. Obviously, there must be a secret that he didn't know. Patriarch, a straightforward person doesn't resort to insinuations. What happened to Brother Wukong? Yi Xian's voice was low. He felt great uneasiness from the unseen world, and it made him feel a sense of trepidation. He is transforming into the Tao. Rumble. It was as if thunder from the 9 heavens had exploded, as if the chaotic star sea was churning. Patriarch Subhuti said these 4 words in a heavy voice. Yi Xian felt his mind rumble as he stood there dumbstruck. Transform. Transform into the Tao. Yi Xian only regained his senses after a full 10 breaths. His mouth trembled as he uttered those 2 words. Even his voice was trembling unconsciously. What was the Tao transformation? To put it in simpler terms, the Tao transformation meant that one's soul would disperse and vanish from the heavens and the earth, and one wouldn't even have the chance to reincarnate. How is this possible? Why did he transform into the Tao? What happened to him? Yi Xian roared at Patriarch Bodhi, his face flushed red. It's a long story. Come with me first. Patriarch Subhuti flicked his sleeves, and the void tore open. Then he strolled into the void. Yi Xian quickly followed behind Patriarch Subhuti. The spring breeze was gentle, and the willows were swaying gently in the wind. There was a vast mountain peak where lush green vegetation grew vigorously. A golden figure sat cross-legged on the mountain peak. In front of him was a vast sea of clouds, which made the scene even more spectacular. Buzz! The void rippled, and Patriarch Subhuti and Yi Xian appeared. When Yi Xian saw the golden figure sitting cross-legged on the mountain peak, his eyes suddenly froze. His lips parted slightly, wanting to call out Sun Wukong's name. But before Yi Xian could speak, Patriarch Subhuti made a shushing gesture, which forced Yi Xian to calm down. He's already in the process of transforming into the Tao. If you suddenly disturb him, he'll fail on the verge of success. It's better to meet him when he wakes up, said Patriarch Subhuti. How could this be? What the hell happened? Yi Xian stared at Sun Wukong's back. Sun Wukong was facing the sea of clouds, and his body was shining with golden light. However, his life force was gradually weakening, and even his body was becoming somewhat illusory. Do you know what Sun Wukong's true form is? Asked Patriarch Subhuti. Hearing Patriarch Subhuti's words, Yi Xian's eyes froze. He slowly said, My brother's true form is the wise stone monkey. Is there a problem with that? Wise stone monkey? Subhuti smiled bitterly and shook his head. His eyes turned abnormally deep as he looked at Yi Xian. This also stunned Yi Xian, and he couldn't help but think about the coldness in Patriarch Subhuti's words. Sun Wukong's true form? Yi Xian muttered to himself. After a full 10 breaths of time, Yi Xian suddenly froze. He looked at Patriarch Subhuti in horror, and even his face turned pale, as if he had understood something. 5-colored divine stone. Yi Xian's voice trembled. These 4 simple words seemed to have exhausted all his strength. That's right, it's the 5-colored divine stone. Patriarch Subhuti nodded heavily. He looked at Sun Wukong absent-mindedly and said in a hoarse voice, The 5-colored divine stone is a supreme treasure of heaven and earth. It has the effect of seizing the fortune of heaven and earth. My disciple Sun Wukong was transformed from the 5-colored divine stone. In the past, Nuwa refined a stone to mend the blue sky, and left behind a 5-colored divine stone. This is my disciple Sun Wukong. As Patriarch Subhuti's words fell, Yi Xian clenched his fists, and the veins on his forehead bulged. His face twisted with malevolence. It seems that you have guessed it. Looking at Yi Xian's terrifying appearance, Patriarch Subhuti let out a long sigh. In the past, the battle between the 2 celestial court pierced through the heavens and brought endless calamity to all living beings in the 3 realms. If you want to mend the heavens, you must use the 5-colored divine stone. However, the 5-colored divine stone is a wondrous item of heaven and earth. There are only 2 of them in this world. One of them was used by Nuwa to mend the heavens, and the other was used by you, brother Sun Wukong. Patriarch Subhuti smiled bitterly. Why is it like this? Why is it like this? Yi Xian's face flushed red. He trembled and growled as if he couldn't believe the reality he was about to face. The 2 celestial court have an unshirkable responsibility for the calamity of heaven and earth. Nuwa is the instigator. If not for Nuwa supporting the ancient demon court, this calamity wouldn't have happened. Hundreds of millions of living beings died, and their resentment and anger are all entangled in Yu and Donghuang Tai. As the instigator, Nuwa can't escape. Even though she is a saint, she has to resolve the anger and resentment of hundreds of millions of living beings. Otherwise, it will cause great harm to her saint heart. If you want to make up for this calamity, you have to refine stones to mend the heavens like in the past. This way, not only can you resolve the anger and resentment of all living beings, but you can also obtain great merit for mending the heavens. My disciple Sun Wukong has a very deep karma with Nuwa. In the past, he was able to take human form because of Nuwa's enlightenment. This time, Nuwa sent a message to me, hoping that my disciple can sacrifice himself for all living beings in the three realms. So, Patriarch Subhuti spoke tirelessly. He couldn't finish his words, but Yi Xian's eyes were already as red as blood, and his steel-like teeth were grinding. Chapter 8:17. So, Nuwa wants Brother Wukong to transform back into the five-colored godstone, so that she can refine it to mend the sky? Yi Xian growled in a low voice, an extremely tyrannical aura permeating the air. You're wrong. Suddenly, Patriarch Subhuti slowly shook his head and said, although Nuwa has done Wukong a favor, how can he transform back into the five-colored godstone for such a favor? Then brother. Yi Xian's expression changed, as if he had thought of something, and his voice became extremely trembling. Looking at Yi Xian's pale face, Patriarch Subhuti said word by word, he wants you to become a saint. Sure enough, Yi Xian bit his lips tightly, his eyes already dull. Looking at Wukong's figure transforming into the Tao, his eyes were filled with guilt. I have told you before that as long as you destroy the undying immortal scripture, you will be able to break free from the control of your Yuan spirit. I do not dare to say that my divine abilities are boundless, but in my Fengsuan mountain, I can allow you to step into the quasi-saint realm within 100,000 years. Patriarch Subhuti paused for a moment, his expression becoming extremely solemn as he looked at Yi Xian and said, Wukong told me before that you have already obtained the Hong Meng immortal qi. As long as he transforms into the five-colored godstone, you will possess the Hong Meng immortal qi and use the five-colored godstone to mend the sky. Then, you can directly become the seventh heaven-ordaining saint. From then on, the six great saints of heaven and earth will no longer be a threat to you. Silence, silence, a deathly silence. Yi Xian knelt on the ground powerlessly, his palms firmly supporting himself on the ground. At this time he finally understood everything. Sun Wukong was transforming into the five-colored godstone to help him become a saint, and help him through the most painful ordeal. Why is it like this? Yi Xian murmured to himself. His palms firmly dug into the ground, and the fluctuations around him caused the void to become chaotic. Even the laws of heaven and earth around him were destroyed one by one, which also proved the extent of the fluctuations in Yi Xian's heart. Brother! Suddenly, Yi Xian stood up abruptly. Chaotic fog pervaded the air, and an extremely bright dim light flickered between Yi Xian's eyebrows. He made a hand seal, preparing some kind of great art, and stepped toward Wukong. If I use your life to exchange for becoming a saint, then what's the use of me, Yi Xian, becoming a saint? Yi Xian appeared in front of Sun Wukong, only to see that Sun Wukong's body was thin. Wu Heaven Art. The sky shook and the void exploded. Extremely terrifying witchlight shot out from Yi Xian's head, and surged with blood energy. It was as if it had transformed into a vast ocean that surged towards Sun Wukong. The Wu Heaven Art was a secret art of the sorcerer tribe. It was recorded in the forbidden chapter of the immortal scripture. Apart from the 12 ancient sorcerers, only Yi Xian knew this secret art. The Wu Heaven Art specialized in cultivating the power of the bloodline. At this moment, Sun Wukong dissipated his blood qi and soul essence to transform into the five-colored godstone. Yi Xian could only use this secret art to force out his blood qi and soul essence to make up for Sun Wukong. Only then could he save his life. Brother! Suddenly, A weak voice came from Sun Wukong's mouth. Sun Wukong slowly opened his eyes, but his eyes were withered and lifeless. He was obviously at the end of his life. Boom! Sun Wukong closed his divine ancestor. The blood qi that Yi Xian forced out could not enter Sun Wukong's body at all. This also made Yi Xian's face turn red, and he looked at Sun Wukong with an extremely anxious expression. Brother, you? Brother, listen to me. Sun Wukong did not know where the strength came from, but he grabbed Yi Xian's arm tightly and directly made Yi Xian sit cross-legged in front of him. A relieved smile appeared on his face. Brother, you don't have to blame yourself, and you don't have to feel guilty. In fact, when you freed me from the path of the three corpses, I knew that I would never be able to become a saint, because my path to becoming a saint has been cut off. The foundation of my great Tao has long been shattered. I can only be a sage to be in this life. Sun Wukong's voice was weak and hoarse, and there was a self-deprecating look in his eyes. He continued, but I can't accept it. I can't accept being a sage to be, and I can't accept being below the 6 great sages. But the will of the heavens is playing tricks on me. I can no longer improve my cultivation. I don't want to live in such a sullen manner. If even my future path is cut off, then I won't be able to find the meaning of living. Because I, old son, have always been determined to be the strongest person, and I want to be above all living things. Even saints have to submit to me. But it's a pity that I can't do it, Sun Wukong muttered in a self-deprecating tone. Then he suddenly looked at Yi Xian. His originally withered eyes were filled with a fiery glow, and even the temperature around him seemed to have risen. But the heavens don't want me to die. You are old son's brother. Even if I transform into the Tao, my brother will definitely be able to become a saint, and even surpass the 6 great sages. You will trample all of them under your feet. Even that old man Hong Jun who has merged with the Tao, I, old son, believe that you won't be any weaker than him. Sun Wukong roared in agitation. Brother, you. Yi Xian was stunned. Yi Xian was stunned as he clenched his fists tightly. He really didn't know what to say, but his eyes were already completely red. An extremely sad feeling filled his heart. Brother, I know that you don't care about becoming a saint through merit, and you don't want to be like the 6 great sages and submit to the heavenly Tao. But even the great god Pangu failed to prove his Tao through strength. This path to becoming a saint is too dangerous. If you really fail to prove your Tao through strength, then abolish this method and change to cultivating merit to become a saint. This is also a way out that I left for you. Sun Wukong grabbed Yi Xian's arm tightly, and his voice was hoarse and intense. No! Yi Xian glared at Sun Wukong and shook his head continuously. Clearly, Yi Xian would never accept using Sun Wukong's life in exchange for a way out. Brother, listen to me. Sun Wukong suddenly pressed on Yi Xian's shoulder. His face was pale and solemn, and he said, Nuwa and Yuanshi want to kill you, and the 2 sages of the West won't let you go. Although Tong Tian wants to protect you, he can't do anything about the 4 great sages. If you encounter the sages one day and can't avoid them, then choose the merit to become a saint. At that time, you will definitely not be afraid of the 4 great sages, because only by living can you have hope to continue. Brother, even without the 5-colored sacred stone and the so-called merit to nourish the heavens, I, Yi Xian, will definitely become a saint. I will never let you die. Yi Xian let out a mournful roar. His cultivation base was raised to the extreme, and even the black saint power that had just been produced in his body was mobilized. Clearly, he wanted to use his cultivation base to save Sun Wukong's life. Brother, it's useless. I have already used up all my vitality. Even Tao ancestor Hong Jun can't save my life. Suddenly, Sun Wukong removed his hands from Yi Xian's shoulders. His body had already disappeared without a trace. A 5-colored light bloomed around him, and he nodded and smiled at Yi Xian. Brother, remember this. When you are truly at the end of your rope, go and mend the sky and walk the path of becoming a saint through virtue. Even though I am not by your side, I, old son's indestructible will always be by your side. Buzz! The 5-colored light shot into the sky, and even the space and time in this part of the world were distorted. In the dazzling 5-colored light, a five-colored sacred stone floated in the void and slowly fell into Yi Xian's hands. Brother! Yi Xian held the five-colored sacred stone in his hands tightly. His entire body was lifeless, as if he had lost his soul. However, other than the five-colored sacred stone in his hands that was blooming with light, Sun Wukong had already transformed into the Tao between heaven and earth. Chapter 8:18. Sigh. Patriarch Subodhi's eyes were cloudy as he let out a long sigh. Then, he patted Yi Xian's shoulder and left with a shake of his head. Yi Xian knelt on the ground, powerless. He stared blankly at the five-colored gem in his hand. He remained motionless as if he had lost his soul. The wind was strong on this day, and the sky above Mount Fangsuan was gray. Perhaps the heavens and earth had sensed it, but a heavy downpour poured down. Not only did it wet Mount Fangsuan, but it also immersed Yi Xian in the torrential downpour. The rain poured down and thunder rumbled. In the misty downpour, only the five-colored gem glowed, reflecting Yi Xian's withered and lifeless eyes. The sun rose and the moon set, and the stars moved. Perhaps a day had passed, or perhaps a year had passed. The sky was blue and clear, and the golden sun hung high in the firmament. The dazzling sunlight shone on the summit of Mount Fangsuan, piercing into Yi Xian's eyes. Yi Xian was like an eternal boulder, but he finally moved. First, he supported himself on the ground with his arms, as if he had used up all his strength to stand up. A faint smile appeared on Yi Xian's lips. He looked up at the blue firmament and saw that it had split open for millions of miles. The twinkling stars and the vast galaxy were incomparably beautiful. Buzz! Ripples appeared in the void. Yi Xian put the five-colored gem into his Sumeru space, then transformed back into Buddha Qingming's appearance, and walked down the mountain. Mount Fangsuan Crescent Tri-Star Cave. Yi Xian was wearing a white monk robe, and Patriarch Subodhi stood side by side with him. A gust of wind blew, breaking the silence between them. Have you really made up your mind? Patriarch Subodhi asked softly. Yes. Yi Xian nodded slightly. You've provoked the sage's murderous intent, making you the enemy of the entire world. Every step you take is fraught with danger. This five-colored godstone can help you obtain the merit of heaven mending, and it's also your last chance. I've said before that as long as you destroy the Immortal Sutra, you can still step into the sage-to-be within 100,000 years. By then, you'll become a saint with the merit of heaven. Naturally, you won't have to fear the 6 sages. Patriarch Subodhi sighed. I don't want to give up yet. Yi Xian gazed into the distance with a smile on his face. However, his smile was resolute and cold, as if he had undergone some sort of transformation. This kind of transformation was inexplicable, but it was real. It was also because of Sun Wukong's death that Yi Xian underwent an unimaginable change. It was hard to tell if this change was good or bad, but it pointed out a path for Yi Xian that he did not want to take in the past. I'm leaving. Take care of yourself, old man. If you need me, don't hesitate to let me know. Yi Xian waved his hand and strolled into the distance. In the vast land, there were primordial beasts galloping, and in the boundless sky, there were ancient birds whistling in the sky. The blood qi of the Wu tribe surged in the sky, and from time to time, the chanting of the Wu tribe could be heard. Yi Xian strolled in the void. With his current cultivation, he could completely feel the terror of the ancestral land of the Wu tribe. There were 6 extremely terrifying auras in the 6 ancestral Magi mountains. Clearly, they were the 6 ancestral Magi who had appeared in the world. Along the way, Yi Xian saw the ancient sorcerer Qiyu, who had once fought with him, and the sword demon who was cultivating sorcery. However, Yi Xian did not have any fluctuations in his emotions. It was as if he had only come here to find someone he did not want to face, but had to face. The fairy of the Moon Palace, Chang'e. Yes, Yi Xian came to the ancestral land of the Wu tribe to find the fairy of the Moon Palace. This was also the purpose of Yi Xian's visit. A giant mountain towered into the clouds. The sea of clouds surrounding it was magnificent. When Yi Xian looked at the mountain with his hands behind his back, his cold gaze became more intense. Dong! Yi Xian took a step forward, causing the air to ripple. Yi Xian instantly disappeared from the spot, heading in the direction of this enormous mountain peak. This was because on this mountain peak, there was someone he wanted to see, and also someone he had to face. The Windrain Peak stood majestically. There was a stone house, an osmanthus tree, and a beautiful woman standing under the osmanthus tree. When the wind blew, the fragrance of the osmanthus flowers filled the entire mountain peak, causing the beautiful woman's clothes to flutter in the wind. She was the fairy of the Moon Palace, the first goddess of the three realms. She was known to have the beauty that overshadowed the three realms. No matter if it was immortals, demons, or devils, they would all be captivated by her beauty. Even the Jade Emperor and Yi of the past were crazy for her. Master, the wind is blowing. You should return to the house. Jade Rabbit transformed into a human and quietly appeared beside Chang'e. There was a hint of worry on her face. Yes, the wind is blowing. The fairy of the Moon Palace looked up at the sky, and a wry smile appeared on her face. However, she did not move and her eyes were a little empty. No one knew what she was thinking. Chapter 819. You still can't forget Yi's death? Or are you worried about Yi Xian's whereabouts? Jade Maiden said softly. She had followed her master for so many years, so she naturally knew what Chang'e was thinking. Yi died because of me. This is the guilt in my heart that I can't let go. Yi Xian was taken away by the two sages of the West. I'm afraid I will never see him again in this life. Fairy Guanghan said to herself with a wry smile. She slowly turned her head to look at Jade Maiden. Her eyes were lifeless and she said, Jade Maiden, why do you think I should live? Looking at Chang'e's miserable face, Jade Maiden was speechless. She didn't know how to answer this question. It seems that you can't answer this question. Fairy Guanghan laughed at herself. She stood under the cassia tree, and her whole person became more and more depressed. Everyone lives for others. Although everyone doesn't want to admit it, it's a fact. Suddenly, a gentle voice came from the top of the mountain. This caused the Moon Fairy to be startled. Jade Maiden's expression changed greatly. She looked toward the source of the voice and let out a delicate rebuke. How dare you? This is the residence of the Holy Virgin of the Wu tribe. Who dares to trespass? Suddenly, Jade Maiden's words came to an abrupt end. She saw a familiar person, a person who frightened her even in death. Yi Xian. Yunyang retreated in shock, because in the distance, Yi Xian was slowly walking towards the two of them. He was dressed in black, and his gray hair fluttered behind his head. He even had a smile on his face, as he looked at the fairy of the Moon Palace. Yi Xian, what are you doing? Jade Maiden suddenly woke up and stood in front of Yi Xian. However, her trembling body betrayed her panic. Because Yunyang had never forgotten that Yi Xian had killed too many people of the Wu tribe. He had even killed Yi with his own hands, even ignoring the pleas of Fairy Guanghan. And the most frightening thing for Yunyang was that after the battle between the two celestial court, Yi Xian was finally taken away by the two sages of the West, but he appeared in the Wu tribe's ancestral land. If Yi Xian really started a massacre, he would certainly bring a heavy blow to the Wu tribe. Even if the 6 great ancestors of sorcery were here, they might not be able to stop him. Yunyang, long time no see. Yi Xian smiled and nodded at Yunyang. Yi Xian, you should leave quickly. If the ancestral sorcerer finds out that you have come to our sorcerer tribe, they will not let you go. Yunyang said with a pale face. Unfortunately, Yi Xian acted as if he didn't hear Yunyang's advice. Instead, he raised his head to look at Fairy Guanghan, under the osmanthus tree, with a slight smile on his face. You are here. Guanghan Fairy bit her lips and stared blankly at Yi Xian. Her eyes were misty and her expression was extremely complicated. Even the aura around her became extremely chaotic. I am here, Yi Xian said softly, and then walked towards Guanghan Fairy. When he came to her side, he held her face and looked at her carefully. I haven't seen you for many years, but you are still so beautiful. Yi Xian sighed. Guanghan Fairy bit her lips and stroked Yi Xian's gray hair as she murmured. You are old, and your hair is getting more and more white. I never grew old when I traveled all over the Green Mountains, but I missed you endlessly. Yi Xian smiled bitterly and looked at Guanghan Fairy in front of him. He couldn't control his emotions and finally spoke of his love. Do you love me? Guanghan Fairy stared blankly at Yi Xian and finally asked the question that she had always wanted to ask. Yes. Yi Xian didn't hesitate at all. He could feel his own heart and gave Guanghan Fairy an affirmative answer. Because I love you, that's why I came to see you. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. His eyes were a little dazed at this moment. He calmed his heart and felt the tenderness between him and Chang'e. It was as if this was what he had wanted for many years, and now he really had it. But if you really love me, why did you kill De Yi? Why did you kill so many people of the Wu tribe? Yi Xian, tell me, why did you do all this? Guanghan Fairy bit her lips. Ever since Yi Xian killed De Yi and so many people of the Wu tribe, she felt a deep sense of guilt. If it weren't for her, the Wu tribe wouldn't have been slaughtered by Yi Xian. This was something that she couldn't let go of. Looking at Guanghan Fairy's miserable expression, Yi Xian looked up at the sky and was speechless. His eyes were a little dazed, but a trace of self-mockery appeared at the corner of his mouth. I don't kill people. People want to kill me, so I kill everyone who wants to kill me. Only then can I stand tall in this chaotic world. Yi Xian looked away from the sky, and then looked at Guanghan Fairy quietly. He said, there is no right or wrong in this world. There is only the strong and the weak. If I had been killed by De Yi back then, if the Wu tribe had destroyed the celestial court, how could we be talking to each other today? Yi Xian said calmly. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Guanghan Fairy looked miserable. She slowly shook her head and said, you can change. You really can change. If you really love me, can't you change for me? I can't. He spoke resolutely and coldly. Lu Bai's smile flashed through Yi Xian's mind, as well as the scene of Sun Wukong transforming into a 5-colored divine stone. At this moment, his eyes also became increasingly cold. Then why did you come to me? Guanghan Fairy asked sadly. She was asking Yi Xian in a daze. Tribulation. The second tribulation of the heavenly path. Yi Xian said calmly. He looked at the woman he loved quietly. Only a trace of sadness spread out. Tribulation. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Guanghan Fairy was stunned. She didn't understand what Yi Xian was talking about. Only a sour feeling appeared in her heart. There are 3 ways to become a saint in the world. The first is to become a saint by virtue. The second is to become a saint by killing 3 corpses. The third is to become a saint by strength. I am going to become a saint by strength. Yi Xian said calmly. Becoming a saint by strength? Guanghan Fairy murmured to herself. Then she suddenly looked at Yi Xian. Her eyes were filled with great shock. Yi Xian, are you crazy? Using strength to prove one's Tao is just a legend. There are even more detailed records in the ancient records of the witch clan. Anyone who uses strength to prove their Tao will end up turning into ashes. Guanghan Fairy said anxiously. At this moment, she finally understood why Yi Xian's cultivation had always been more terrifying than people of the same realm. Even the 2 demon emperors had been defeated by him. It turned out that he was going to become a saint by strength. Stepping into the sage to be. I have already passed the first tribulation of the 9 tribulations of the heavenly path. Now I am meeting you to pass the second tribulation, which is the love tribulation that I have never wanted to face. A self-deprecating smile appeared on Yi Xian's face. His voice seemed calm, but if one listened carefully, one would find that his voice contained a trace of tremor. This proved that Yi Xian's heart was not calm. Chapter 820. Love Trial. The goddess of Guanghan was stunned. She murmured and looked at Yi Xian in a daze. Yes, love trial. You are my love trial. Yi Xian did not look into the goddess of Guanghan's eyes. He looked up at the sky and muttered to himself. The bitter smile on his face deepened. Silence, silence, silence. Even time and space seemed to have stopped at this moment. An oppressive and heavy atmosphere grew between the 2 of them. So I have always been your love trial. Today you came to find me to go through the trial? The goddess of Guanghan was the first to break the silence. A self-mocking smile appeared on her face. She seemed to vaguely understand what Yi Xian was going to do. The so-called love is just an illusion. The so-called beauty is just a skeleton. I have never believed in the so-called love since I was young. Yi Xian looked up at the sky and muttered to himself. He seemed to be talking to himself. You want to kill me? The goddess of Guanghan shook her head. She appeared very calm, but her eyes were withered and lifeless. The bitterness on her face was very strong. She had already guessed what Yi Xian was going to do. The butcher's knife cuts the threads of love. Love turns to ashes. Since you are my trial, I will kill you. Only then can I go through the second trial of the heavenly Tao. I hope you don't blame me. Yi Xian looked away from the sky. He finally looked at the goddess of Guanghan with a determined gaze. However, his eyes were trembling slightly. It proved that he was not calm. Can you bear to kill me? Looking at Yi Xian's seemingly calm face, the goddess of Guanghan smiled sadly. She stared blankly at Yi Xian. There was no light of fear in her eyes. It was as if she was waiting for something. 10,000 years in a glance. When the two of them looked at each other, time seemed to stop at that moment. Space and time between heaven and earth seemed to change and become hazy. Memories. It was a very simple word, but it filled the minds of the two of them, causing Yi Xian to recall every bit of the past. The first time he had entered the celestial court, the lingering feelings in the moon palace. The woman who had stunned him, Yi Xian, had even caused his cold and loveless heart to crack open, filling it with the beauty of the number one goddess of the three realms. Yi Xian had once thought that he would not have the so-called love, until the moment he saw the moon fairy. His heart told himself that he had to have this woman. In the battle of the celestial court, Yi Xian was defeated and went to the lower realm. The fairy of the moon palace begged the Jade Emperor humbly. These memories kept echoing in Yi Xian's mind. Fairy Guanghan had never done anything wrong to him. If someone had to apologize, it should be him, Yi Xian, who had let her down. Love is separated by mountains and seas. The mountains and seas can be flattened. I can flatten the mountains and seas, but I can't flatten the things on my back. Yi Xian was talking in his sleep. His eyes became colder, and the memories in his mind gradually disappeared. Some familiar figures appeared in his mind one by one. What are you carrying? Fairy Guanghan asked sadly. She wanted Yi Xian to give her an answer. Yi Xian was dressed in black, and his gray hair hung behind his head. A gust of wind blew over, causing his hair to flutter in the wind. It made him seem as if he'd returned to the memories of the past. Kill. The sky was dark. Thunder roared. That day, the two celestial court fought. The troops of the celestial court were bathed in blood. They turned into floating corpses and fell from the sky. Celestial Emperor. Blood, blood. The demons were roaring. The troops of the celestial court were roaring. The blood of the immortals and demons was like the waves of the vast ocean. It had already soaked Yi Xian's eyes. Immortals and demon kings fell one by one. They were Yi Xian's most loyal subordinates. In that battle, they were all buried between heaven and earth for Yi Xian. Lu Bai's only beloved disciple, the woman who was dressed in snow-white clothes like her master, was killed by Nuwa. She was killed in order to give Yi Xian a chance to escape. Lu Bai, the peerless genius, an unprecedented genius unknown to the world. He exhausted his blood, soul, and essence to build the inverse immortal formation. He helped Yi Xian survive the death tribulations. The cost of building the inverse immortal formation was that his soul would be destroyed. But even after his death, his spirit did not vanish. Together with Yi Xian, he built the fourth great formation of heaven and earth. Sun Wukong, who had helped him to become a sage-to-be. He even transformed into a 5-colored divine stone on the peak of Mount Fangsuan, leaving him a way out. One by one, these memories continuously echoed in Yi Xian's mind. His eyes became even more blood-red, and his aura became even colder. What have I been carrying? Yi Xian laughed self-deprecatingly. He looked around the world. Those who had died flashed through his mind. A touch of hostility grew in the depths of his eyes. I have been carrying their lives and their expectations, so I want to climb to the top step by step. I want to become the saint of all saints. Is this answer enough? Yi Xian looked back at the fairy of Guanghan. His eyes were cold and emotionless. They contained a suppressed madness. Tap, tap, tap. When she saw Yi Xian's bloody eyes, the fairy of Guanghan unconsciously retreated. because Yi Xian's eyes were so terrifying that they made her soul tremble. What kind of eyes were those? They were a pair of eyes filled with hatred. They were a pair of eyes filled with ferocity. They were like a sleeping, peerless beast that was gradually awakening. It wanted to devour everything it could see. Master, leave quickly. He has gone mad. Suddenly, Yunyang sent a palm towards Yi Xian. She let out an anxious cry, because she had been vigilant against Yi Xian. When she felt Yi Xian's crazy murderous intent, she wanted to protect her master and stop Yi Xian. No. Seeing Yunyang attacking Yi Xian, the fairy of Guanghan's expression changed. She let out an anxious cry, and looked at Yi Xian with an extremely pleading gaze. Unfortunately, it was all too late. When Yi Xian came to the world of the shaman, it meant that he had made a decision. And this decision was to cut off all the troubles and emotions. That why Yi Xian didn't even look at Yunyang, and let her palm strike his heart. However, his palm was glowing. This was a cold light that quietly swept across Yunyang's neck. Hot blood spurted out as Yunyang's headless body fell from the void. With a loud bang, Yunyang died. Even at the moment of her death, her eyes were wide open, as if she couldn't believe that she would die so easily in the hands of Yi Xian. The 6 desires are emotionless, and the world is heartless. The world is a slaughterhouse, and all living beings are pigs and dogs. With my butcher's blade, I will cut off all emotions and extinguish all love. Buzz! The void trembled, and a bloody light roared. Yi Xian flipped his hand, and a blood-colored heavenly blade appeared in his hand. His eyes were bloody and terrifying as he let out an emotionless voice. He dragged the blade's handle, and the sharp blade rubbed against the ground as he walked towards the fairy of Guanghan. Chapter 821. Thud thud thud. Yi Xian dragged the blood-red heavenly saber forward steadily. However, with every step he took, the heavenly saber rubbed against the hard ground, creating a large amount of sparks. An earth-shattering murderous aura bloomed around Yi Xian. Yi Xian! Fairy Guanghan's expression was sorrowful as she watched Yi Xian walk towards her step by step. 2 streams of tears flowed from her eyes, because at this moment, Yi Xian seemed to have transformed into a ferocious beast that chose people to devour. He was definitely going to devour her, until not even her bones remained. Little sister, leave quickly. Suddenly, a beam of witchcraft light shot over from the distant sky. The burly figure released an extremely ferocious blood qi. The person let out a shrill roar, and swung his fists violently towards Yi Xian. Quafu, the grand sorcerer of the sorcerer tribe, was comparable to the peak of the grand heavenly realm. When such a big commotion occurred at the peak of the mountain, Quafu naturally sensed it. When he saw Yi Xian walking towards the goddess of Guanghan with the blood-red heavenly saber in his hand, he hurriedly attacked Yi Xian, because he could not let Yi Xian kill the goddess of Guanghan. Big brother, leave quickly. Quafu's appearance did not surprise the goddess of Guanghan at all, because she deeply understood that no one could stop Yi Xian. This would only bring unnecessary casualties to the sorcerer tribe. Yi Xian! Quafu roared loudly. His fists covered the sky with witchcraft light, and fell on Yi Xian's head. It was also at this moment that the goddess of Guanghan burst into tears. She covered her eyes in despair, because she did not want to see Quafu die tragically in front of her. Puff! Yi Xian's feet paused. He didn't even glance at Quafu. He only slashed through the air with his blood-colored heavenly saber, creating a gap in the space around him. With a muffled sound, 2 corpses fell from above his head. Bang! Yi Xian cut Quafu into 2 halves with 1 slash. The blood that gushed out dyed the ground red, and Quafu let out a muffled groan. Killing 1 is killing 2 is also killing. If you want to die, of course I will fulfill your wish. Yi Xian looked down at Quafu. His expression was ferocious and twisted. His bloody eyes were like the eyes of the netherworld. Little sister, he has already joined the devil. Run! Grand Sorcerer Quafu's body was indeed strong. Even though he had been cut in half by Yi, he was still alive. Half of his body was still struggling in a pool of blood. And he was still screaming at the goddess of the moon fairy. Big brother! The moon fairy suddenly opened her eyes and let out a painful cry. Tears flowed out of her eyes uncontrollably, and her slender body trembled slightly. "Little sister, I will send you to hell." Yi Xian took a deep breath. He dragged the blade and continued to walk toward the goddess of the moon fairy. Although his aura was cold and ruthless, there was a touch of pity in his eyes. "Yi Xian, if you kill her, the 6 ancestors of sorcerers will not let you go. You have made such a big noise here. I am afraid that the 6 ancestors of sorcerers are already here. It is not too late for you to retreat now." Quafu was roaring, hoping to make Yi Xian hesitate. Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not seem to hear him. He was still walking steadily toward the goddess of the moon fairy. Rumble! The void exploded, and the world was in chaos. Finally, Yi Xian came to the goddess of the moon fairy. He slowly raised the blood-red heavenly saber in his hand, and a smile appeared on his face. "I am sorry. If I don't kill you, I will never be able to make any progress in my life. I will remember your voice and face deep in my mind, and I will never forget you." Yi Xian smiled and whispered, "Yi Xian, don't you dare." Boom! Quafu was bathed in blood. He suddenly smashed his fists on the ground, and his whole body turned into a beam of witch light, rushing toward Yi Xian. However, before his body hit Yi Xian's ruthless voice came at this moment. "Go away!" Bang! With a single thought, life and death reincarnation, Yi Xian lightly spat out a single word. The laws of the world suddenly went berserk, and Quafu exploded into a bloody mist that filled the sky, completely dissipating from the world. Dead? Are they all dead? The goddess of the moon fairy seemed to have lost her soul. She stared blankly at Quafu, who had died tragically in front of her. A half-crying, half-smiling expression appeared on her face. "Yi Xian, you are so cruel." The goddess of the moon fairy gradually calmed down, and she was smiling at Yi Xian. However, her smile was extremely cold and contained unwillingness and despair. "I see hatred in your eyes. Unfortunately, today is the day we end. If you have an afterlife, don't meet me again." Yi Xian smiled casually, and the blood saber in his hand finally fell down. Chi! The bloody light illuminated heaven and earth, and a touch of sadness surrounded the void. A stream of hot blood sprayed on Yi Xian's face. The goddess of the moon fairy's throat was cut open, and her eyes were gradually losing focus. She even smiled at Yi Xian blankly. Bang! With a muffled sound, the goddess of the moon fairy's body fell to the ground powerlessly. From now on, the goddess of the moon fairy no longer existed in the 3 realms, even though she did not even have the chance to be reincarnated. The Wu clan did not have a primordial spirit. When the physical body died, the person would really die. Quafu was like that, and so was the goddess of the moon fairy. Clang! With a crisp sound, the blood-red saber fell to the ground. The murderous aura around Yi Xian disappeared without a trace. His bloody eyes became clear, and he knelt on the ground, as if he had lost all his strength. Dead! Yes, she is really dead. I killed her with my own hands. Yi Xian was smiling eerily, but his smile was full of pain. He had killed the woman he had fallen in love with his own hands. And he had also killed his so-called love tribulation with his own hands. Puff! A mouthful of blood sprayed out from Yi Xian's mouth. He tightly clutched his chest as his entire body trembled. The faintly discernible black saint energy within his body swam within his body. An extremely unfathomable energy exploded out from within his body, causing the black saint energy to rapidly grow stronger. Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not feel happy at all. He just stared blankly at the goddess of the moon fairy's body, and he even reached out a trembling hand to touch the goddess of the moon fairy's cheek. It was as if he had lost his soul. Ah! Suddenly, Yi Xian roared ferociously. The space and time between heaven and earth seemed to be distorted at this moment. Waves of blood and black light spread out in all directions with him as the center. Rumble! The mountains and rivers were destroyed, and the rivers and seas were turned into smoke. Mountain peaks were collapsing, and the rivers and seas in the Wu clan's world were turning into smoke. A scene of destruction was gradually emerging. Ah! Like a demon, like a fog, like an illusion, Yi Xian was completely surrounded by waves of blood and black light. He suddenly picked up the goddess of the moon fairy's body and roared madly at the sky. Why? Why can I only kill? Why can I only sever my love and abandon my love? Yi Xian's angry roar echoed in all directions. The terrifying waves brought terrible destruction to the Wu clan's world, but Yi Xian seemed to have fallen into madness. He could not stop the sadness in his heart. How dare you? Suddenly, 6 terrifying witchcraft lights shot out from all directions. They were the 6 great witches who were guarding the Wu clan's world. Behind the 6 great witches, there were countless people from the Wu clan following behind them. In just 3 breaths, they had completely surrounded the mountain peak where Yi Xian was. Chapter 822. Who are you? 6 stalwart figures stood in the void, and beams of terrible ancestral sorcerer light shot up to the sky from the 6 great ancestors of sorcerer. Gomong, the ancestor of sorcerer Dongfang Mu, was frowning and looking at Yi Xian. There was an imperceptible heaviness in his eyes. You dare to break into the ancestral land of the sorcerer tribe and kill our people. You are very bold. Zhu Rong was the most hot-tempered. The ancestral sorcerer fire was burning fiercely, and even the void around him was constantly disappearing. Where do you come from? Ancestor of sorcerer Xian Ming's face was cloudy and uncertain. He was testing Yi Xian. Fellow Taoist, you have a profound cultivation base. I wonder who you are. Tianhao, the ancestor of sorcerer of wind, was the most easygoing, and could be said to be unparalleled in wisdom. He seemed to be asking Yi Xian with a smile, but he was secretly transmitting a sound to the other 5 great ancestors of sorcerer, telling them not to act rashly. As the saying goes, one can know the whole leopard from a single spot. Yi Xian was covered by blood waves and black light at the moment, so no one could see what he looked like. However, the aura he released was so terrible that it gave the 6 great ancestors of sorcerer a lot of pressure. And this was not the point. The 6 great ancestors of sorcerer were definitely at the top of the sage to be, and they were transformed by Panga's blood essence. A person who could make them feel terrible was certainly not a simple person. What's more, Yi Xian entered the ancestral land of the sorcerer tribe quietly, without alerting the 6 great ancestors of sorcerer, and easily killed Quafu, fairy of Guanghan, and the others. If he had not exposed such a fierce devil qi, the 6 great ancestors of sorcerer would not have noticed his existence. And with this ability alone, they could see that Yi Xian was definitely not a person to be trifled with. The wind and rain were on the peak, and the sea of clouds was lingering. The sorcerer tribe was full of killing intent. The 6 great ancestors of sorcerer sealed the sky and trapped the earth. Only Yi Xian stood on the peak with the body of fairy of Guanghan in his arms. However, at this moment Yi Xian was in an extremely unstable state. It was as if he had fallen into the legendary state of demonization. The blood waves and black light were surging ceaselessly on his body like the waves of the sea. It was as if he had not heard the question of the 6 ancestors of sorcery. Demons were born from the heart, severing emotions and abandoning love. This was an extremely terrifying transformation, and it was also Yi Xian's second tribulation of the heavenly Tao. If he couldn't overcome this tribulation, then his soul would scatter between heaven and earth. The so-called method of using strength to prove one's Tao is actually a process of self-transformation. The difficulty of this process was simply unimaginable to outsiders. At this moment, Yi Xian's mind was in a semi-conscious state, but the so-called demon heart was growing in Yi Xian's heart. What was the devil heart? The demonic heart was unclear. This wasn't some kind of realm, nor did it represent one's own cultivation. Rather, it was a release of one's temperament. Everyone had a demon suppressed in the deepest part of their body, but it wasn't easy to detect at ordinary times. However, when this person released the demonic heart, the darkest emotions would be magnified rapidly, causing unimaginable negative emotions to this person. Yi Xian wasn't heartless, but his emotions were hidden very deeply. However, when he truly faced his own emotions, he waved his butcher's knife and cut off everything. This kind of heartache was magnified rapidly. The demonic heart made him like a demon, and his heart was filled with extremely negative emotions. The most crucial problem was that there wasn't only one method of using strength to prove one's Tao. Some cultivated the saint heart, while Yi Xian cultivated the devil heart. Furthermore, the immortal scripture was a demon scripture, a chaos demon scripture. This scripture was obscure and difficult to understand, but it was an unprecedented demonic scripture. Yi Xian had been cultivating the undying immortal scripture since he was young, and he'd been cultivating it for over 100,000 years. The undying immortal scripture had already been deeply imprinted into his bones. Get lost! A pair of ferocious eyes collapsed the void. The rolling waves of blood and the demonic light covered the sky and the earth. The demonic aura spread in all directions, causing the sorcerer tribesmen to retreat continuously. Even the 6 great ancestors of sorcerer looked at him in fear. Where did this demonic creature come from? Ancestor of sorcerer Xian Ming growled in horror. Even though he was one of the 12 great ancestors of sorcerer, his mind was trembling in the face of Yi Xian's unparalleled ferocious power. Kill! Yi Xian's demonic roar was torrential. His fist disrupted the heaven and earth, and attacked the 6 great ancestors of sorcerer. The eternal demonic light that exploded the heaven and earth seemed to penetrate the entire ancestral sorcerer world. You're courting death. The 6 great ancestors of sorcerer were furious. They didn't expect Yi Xian to dare to attack them. Moreover, he attacked them with his physical body. He didn't take them seriously at all. What was the sorcerer tribe most proud of? Their physical body was extremely strong. Among those in the same realm, the sorcerer tribe was known as the strongest. Their physical body was indestructible. Even the 2 demon emperors of the demon clan would never dare to fight with the 12 great ancestors of sorcerer world in close combat. However, the unknown demonic creature in front of them dared to attack them with his physical body. Although the 6 great ancestors of sorcerer world felt that the demonic creature's cultivation was extremely terrifying, the 12 great ancestors of sorcerer world had never been afraid of anyone when it came to physical combat. Die! Ancestor of sorcerer Zhurong showed his invincible power. The ancestor of sorcerer heavenly fire burst out. He swung his fists and attacked Yi Xian like meteors. His physical body collapsed the void. He was determined to kill Yi Xian between heaven and earth. How dare you, demonic creature! Today I'll kill you here. Ancestor of sorcerer Xian Ming roared in a gloomy voice and attacked Yi Xian. 2 great ancestors of sorcerer world attacked Yi Xian at the same time. If it were in the past, Yi Xian would definitely die. Unfortunately, the 2 great ancestors of sorcerer world didn't know what kind of terrifying figure they were facing at the moment. Bang! There was a loud explosion, and the sky collapsed. Yi Xian was like a demon, crazy and crazy. He let out a demonic roar, and a pair of fists lit up the universe and broke the barrier of space. Rumble! Yi Xian and the 2 ancestral shamans collided, and with the 3 of them as the center, an extremely terrifying force exploded out. The space in the ancestral shaman world collapsed inch by inch, and the land within tens of thousands of kilometers collapsed with a loud bang. Crack! Under the sky and in the void, the sound of bones cracking could be heard. The 2 great ancestors of sorcerer world looked flustered. They no longer had the arrogance they had just now. At the moment, their faces were twisted in pain. Because their fists were collapsing inch by inch, their fists were distorted in an extremely irregular way. Under the bombardment of Yi Xian's fists, the 2 great ancestors of sorcerer world's fists were badly mutilated. Obviously, the 2 great ancestors of sorcerer world were no match for Yi Xian in terms of physical strength. Scram! Yi Xian laughed savagely. His immortal body of the great all-embracing heaven was too terrifying. Moreover, he was currently in the second tribulation of the heavenly Tao. The black saint energy in his body was surging and roaring, causing his immortal body of the great all-embracing heaven to undergo an extremely terrifying transformation. Bang! Mountains and rivers were destroyed, and the world exploded. Yi Xian violently punched out 2 fists. Under the dumbfounded gazes of the sorcerer world, and the 4 great ancestors of sorcerer world, Zhurong and Xian Ming were directly sent flying. The bones in their hands exploded into a bloody mist. This terrifying scene was simply unbearable to look at. The so-called, using strength to prove one's Tao, was to walk the path of the fusion of spirit and body. This method was not only reflected in one's cultivation, but also in one's physical body. Chapter 823. When Yi Xian passed the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao, his body had been changing imperceptibly. At this moment, when he was in the demon heart state, he was going through the second tribulation of the heavenly Tao. His origin immortal body was undergoing an extremely terrifying transformation, and this transformation was developing in a good direction. The ancestral shaman's physical body was indeed terrifyingly powerful, but it was still inferior to the current Yi Xian by 2 levels. Not to mention that Yi Xian's cultivation and physical body were both advancing at the same time. Even if the 2 ancestral shamans joined forces to fight him, they were still defeated by Yi Xian in a single strike. Rumble. Just as the shaman tribe and the 4 ancestral shamans were in a daze, Yi Xian let out a savage laugh. He suddenly took a step forward, and his terrifying body tore through space. He instantly appeared in front of the 2 ancestral shamans, Zhurong and Xian Ming. Be careful! Ancestral shaman Vast Heaven suddenly woke up and let out an ear-piercing scream. His eyes suddenly froze, and there was an extremely anxious look in his eyes. Crack! The extremely ear-piercing sound of bones cracking could be heard, and an extremely terrifying scene appeared. Yi Xian's blood and black light surged like a tide. He cruelly reached out his hand to grab the arms of the 2 ancestral shamans. As the 2 ancestral shamans let out miserable groans, their arms were twisted off by Yi Xian. Rip! The blood of the ancestral shamans spilled into the sky, and the 2 bloody arms were casually thrown away by Yi Xian. His savage laughter came from all directions, and with a loud bang, Yi Xian punched through the chests of the 2 ancestral shamans. The so-called ancestral shamans were as weak as clay puppets in front of Yi Xian. How dare you! Suddenly, the 4 ancestral shamans roared in anger. They finally recovered from their shock, and the 4 of them attacked Yi Xian together. Obviously, they wanted to save Zhurong and Xian Ming from Yi Xian's hands. I'll send you on your way. Yi Xian laughed viciously. He grabbed the arms of Zhurong and Xian Ming and threw them towards the 4 ancestors of Magi like weapons. It was as if at this very moment, Zhurong and Xian Ming had become Yi Xian's weapons. Bang 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 bang. Yi Xian's cultivation had long surpassed that of a sage-to-be, and his physical body was even stronger than before. Furthermore, the other 4 great ancestors of sorcery were extremely wary of the 2 great ancestors of sorcery that had fallen into Yi Xian's hands. Under these circumstances, the 4 great ancestors of sorcery suddenly fell into a passive position and were suddenly suppressed by Yi Xian. The 4 great ancestors of sorcery and Yi Xian directly engaged in a battle. The terrifying power that burst forth caused the mountains to explode. The space of the sorcerer world was also crumbling inch by inch, as if it would collapse at any time. Boom boom boom. Yi Xian suddenly smashed Zhurong flying, turning a towering mountain into dregs. Zhurong's tattered body fiercely smashed onto the ground, and the ghastly white bones exposed on his chest simply didn't dare to be looked directly at. Boom! Yi Xian took a step forward, causing the heavens to collapse and the earth to split. Half of ancestral witch Xian Ming's body exploded from his stomp. Amidst Yi Xian's sinister laughter, he even used ancestral witch Xian Ming as a stepping board and charged towards the 4 great ancestral witches. Terrifying, too terrifying. Yi Xian's cultivation was simply out of control. 2 great ancestors of sorcery were seriously injured by Yi Xian, and the 4 great ancestors of sorcery simply had no power to fight back in the face of Yi Xian's terrifying suppression. The physical body of the sorcerer tribe that they were so proud of was simply vulnerable in front of Yi Xian. Bang 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 bang. Ancestor of sorcery? The people of the sorcerer tribe screamed in horror. They could not believe what they had seen. The ancestor of sorcery, who was like a god in their hearts, was beaten by a person to the point that he did not even have the power to fight back. This simply made them fall into a nightmare that they could not wake up from. Ancestor of sorcery will help you. Suddenly, countless sorrowful and angry roars of the sorcerer tribe came from all directions. The ancient sorcerer Yi Xian was holding the Qiyu saber and attacking Yi Xian. Dozens of ancient sorcerers were using their most powerful skills to attack Yi Xian. At the same time, millions of people of the sorcerer tribe were rushing over from all directions. Regardless of their cultivation, they were crazily attacking Yi Xian. The 12 ancient sorcerers were the guardians of the sorcerer tribe, and the symbol of invincibility. Today, even if the 6 great ancestors of sorcery were defeated, they absolutely could not die in the hands of Yi Xian. This also aroused the blood of the people of the sorcerer tribe to resist. Kill. Destroy this demonic creature. Protect the ancestor of sorcery. Like a tsunami, countless people of the sorcerer tribe were completely crazy. They were not afraid of death, and were crazily attacking Yi Xian. No matter if they were ordinary people of the sorcerer tribe, or those ancient sorcerers or great sorcerers, they were all crazily attacking Yi Xian. You're a bunch of lowly ants. Yi Xian roared sinisterly. His eyes were filled with boundless ferocity, as surging waves of blood and black light violently churned around his body. When he struck out with his palm, a fiendish demonic light that could destroy the heavens and earth surged out, causing a boundless calamity to the shamans. Rumble! Countless people of the sorcerer tribe turned into a rain of blood. They had no power to resist Yi Xian's attack. The Qiyu Devil Saber was shattered and half of his body turned into a bloody mist. If he had not dodged in time, he would have died under Yi Xian's attack. Roar! When the rain of blood fell from the sky, it also bathed Yi Xian. The strong smell of blood seemed to have deeply stimulated him, causing him to open his arms and have an intoxicated look on his face. It was as if he was immersed in this bloody feast and could not extricate himself. A demon's heart shook the world. This was something that came from passing the second tribulation of the way of heaven. This demon's heart was deeply rooted in Yi Xian's body and was slowly growing, bringing extreme negative emotions to Yi Xian. This was a great tribulation, the so-called second tribulation of the way of heaven. The demon's heart was a double-edged sword. If Yi Xian could survive this tribulation, he would control the power that the demon's heart gave him. If he could not survive this tribulation, he would gradually be affected by the extreme negative emotions produced by the demon's heart, and turn into a demonic creature that only knew how to kill. In the 9 tribulations of the way of heaven, 9 died and 9 survived. Every tribulation was a kind of transformation. If one succeeded, the sea and sky would open up, and if one failed, one's soul would be destroyed. The further one progressed, the more terrifying the tribulation was. Even the great god Pangu, who created the world in the past, died under the 9th tribulation. All of you must die. The demon's roar of heaven and earth killed thousands of lives. The blood waves and black light around Yi Xian's body burned even more fiercely. He pointed his finger like a sword, and the great techniques of the immortal scripture condensed, and attacked the sorcerer tribe in all directions. Chi! Chi! It was as if a river of stars had overturned the heavens, as if a great star had been destroyed. Strands of demonic light of annihilation leaped out from Yi Xian's fingertips, drawing a heavenly slaughter demon diagram for this world, and bringing an unimaginable calamity to the shamans. No. Even the members of the witch clan were no exception. Yi Xian was using the great technique of the undying immortal scripture. Under his cultivation that surpassed that of a quasi-sage, the blood of countless witch clan members splattered across the sky, causing a rain of blood to fall from the sky. This caused Yi Xian's gaze to become even more bloodthirsty and fierce, and his own intelligence gradually became blurry. Chi! 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 At this moment, Yi Xian seemed to be incomparably ferocious, and no one could stop him from killing. However, he was currently undergoing the second tribulation of the heavenly Tao. If he continued to kill like this, it wouldn't be long before he lost his intelligence and became a monster that only knew how to kill. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.